Let's go. All right, take 3. Here we go. Can you hear me, Tina? Yes. Hear me, Tina?
Yes, can hear you well now. Thank you.
Yay.
Hey.
Rebecca with us? There you are, Rebecca. Morning, Rebecca. Can you hear me okay?
Morning, I can hear you now. Thank you.
And are we waiting on one other individual?
Fran, can you turn on your camera, please? Mr. Duker, can you turn on your camera, please?
I am trying to do that. Having a bit of a trouble. There we go. Can you see me now? I don't know.
No.
All right, I'm working on it. Continue on.
As long as you can hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Thank you so much. As I mentioned yesterday, work group members who participate remotely will need to be other individuals 18 years of age or older present in the room at the reception, and the general nature of the member's relationship with such individual. Are there any disclosures?
This is Tina Sloan. There are no other people age 18 or over in the room with me.
This is Rebecca Sackett. Also, I know disclosures.
Frank Ducor, I have no disclosures.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. As a reminder, work group members who are participating via Zoom must be visible at all times on camera. Please log off Zoom if you leave the meeting and log in when you're ready to join the meeting. If you experience broadband or internet connectivity problems while participating in the meeting, that would be remedied by joining without video. You must announce the reason for your non-appearance when you turn off your camera. We now take roll recording secretary.
Devin Beasley.
Here.
Ms. Vaughn. Here. Patricia Camarillo. Kathy Krisha. Here. Maria Diaz-Catano. Duker.
Here.
Vanessa Escobar. Here. Estrada Revelas. Here. Corey Harvey. Here. Colleen Heisman.
Here.
Herrera. Linda Hong. Here. Morgan. John Northam.
Here.
Benjamin Odell.
Here.
Here. Kathleen Raleigh. Here. Becca Sackett.
Here.
Here.
Tina Sullivan. Here. Paula Valdez. Julie Warniner. Here. Matt Wallace.
Here.
Beverly Young. Here. We have a quorum.
Wonderful. All right, so we are going to move to item 1B on your handout. Everyone should have these slides for today printed out in case you wanted to take notes. 1B is an informational item. Would any commission liaisons or staff like to address the group before we begin the presentations this morning?
Welcome back, everyone. I am really eager to hear your conversations and your questions around the data and the models we have today. A continuation of what yesterday. Thank you so much for being here. And
two quick things. I want to just admire the resilience and patience of the room dealing with technical issues. I know that for teachers, this is a regular day in the life. For some of the rest of us, it's just annoying, but you're all handling it brilliantly. So thank you for that. I also wanted to wish Marissa Luna Lopez, sorry, I was getting that mixed up. Happy birthday. Oh, happy birthday. We love getting to celebrate your birthday with you. You talk about this topic. Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, just well, thank you again for the resilience here. You know, we are the test. We are the test case for this building and for this room, and I'm sure that our suffering will lead to some really wonderful outcomes for the people that are going to enjoy this room later this week. Commissioners, indeed. And just wanted to, same thing that I had to share yesterday. The two things I would like to share as we're kind of going through our time today is one is to consider the law. And we've done a lot of work on the definitions and sort of getting to some clarity, initial clarity about what you all mean with the different concepts. And the second is to kind of really consider when we look at data, I know this is it's always tempting to sort of view data in the abstract and just to do our best to kind of connect those to lived human experiences. And with that.
Wonderful. It is now time for item 2B, performance assessment model presentations, performance assessment model presentations. First today, we have Cal TPA presenting, and I will turn it over to Ting and her colleague.
Thank you very much. So good morning. And again, thank you for your patience. We have 45 minutes with you to do some high-level direct instruction. We would ask that you hold questions for our last 15 minutes that we will be able to have with you. And of course, frankly, we're always available for your questions. So it's quite a challenge to take the amount of work that we have managed to develop in the commission's model over the last 10 years into 45 minutes, but we will do our best. This is really a presentation of a high level that will point out resources that you can then go back and really look at and grapple with and think deeply about, that will hopefully inform the conversations as we go forward. And we appreciate all of the questions and conversations to date and are looking forward to having this chance to clarify what this model, this really series of models looks like for us. And I am joined by my team. So Marissa Luna Lopez, happy birthday, is with us today on her birthday. I said, look, this will be a birthday you'll never forget. We'll have it at the commission. And the rest of our team is online. So I wanted to just take a quick second to introduce them. So we have a brand new member, Jeff Boss, who has joined us to do analysis of the data that we collect consistently over time. Also online, we have Julie Holmes, who's joined us as a consultant, former education specialist teacher. Heather Kennedy joins us, also former education specialist teacher, to work specifically. She came to work with us on the literacy performance assessment that we'll talk about. Marissa joined us also recently, also a teacher of teachers, and has a lot to offer to this work. And then Gay Roby has joined us in this work over the many last years, around our administrative assessment. So we not only have performance assessment in California for teachers, we also have it for those seeking the administrative services credential. And then Zoltan Sarda, also a teacher, kindergarten teacher for many, many years, and a teacher of teachers himself. And his expertise has really lent to our work around early childhood performance assessment. So whole group of teachers here, self included, working on this with teachers over many, many years. So let's move on. And again, thank you to the team for joining us. We also are joined by Xavier Webb, who is a colleague of ours at Evaluation Systems. Evaluation Systems is our technical contractor who has worked with us over the last many years to build out all of these different models for the state. So let's move on. And we'll get our PowerPoint up. Sure. And you all do have the PowerPoint and paper in front of you. Some of it's very tiny text. I apologize. But you'll be able to hopefully see it on the screen, or we can always get you a copy you can read. So we're going to start today as she pulls it up and you can see in front of you with an overview of the model itself. So we have sort of this very specific structure that we've built out all these different credential specific models for. It is formative in nature, and we'll talk through that about how we see that. It is valid and authentic to the work of teaching, we believe, reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom settings, appropriate for beginning teachers. And yesterday, of course, much discussion about that term. And really, when we see that term today, we were asked to use this term, but really they're teacher candidates. And we very much appreciate the fact that they are teacher candidates entering the first step of the profession of becoming a teacher. And then how do we mitigate bias in our work? And how do we set that bias aside? We all have bias. How do we set that aside? So we're going to speak to each of these topics, and I'm going to try and move as quickly as I can. Some of these slides I may just kind of touch on and point you to the resources, given our time constraints. So let's start with our Cal TPA model overview. In the models that we have built out for the different credential specific types, we have 4 particular steps. And these steps are the kinds of things that we do believe teachers do on a daily basis. And we'll be talking about that. But they start with the concept of planning instruction in an asset-based way for the students and children in front of them. And also paying careful attention to the cultural and linguistic assets they bring into the classroom and how they can bring those forward in a sustainable way in their instruction. Then they get up on their feet and teach and video record and assess simultaneously. This was a big point of discussion in the design team back in 15, 16, 16, 17. The teaching and assessing are happening simultaneously. They are 2 sides to the same point. And then finally, that's next step of reflection on your practice. What's effective about your instruction for these students in front of you? And what is it you've learned about yourself as a teacher? The final step of how do you apply that knowledge of that reflective act? What was effective for the students in front of you? What needs to happen next for them? And then what do you do next as that teacher to really ensure through a universal design lens how you're reaching the needs of every single student or child that you're supporting in your class? There are 2 cycles in this model, and that speaks, again, we'll come back and talk about that in the formative lens. But the first cycle, 2 cycles were developed. They were developed in a way that was supportive to teacher development. So the first one is more restricted and specific. 1 lesson, 3 types of learners, reflect, apply. The second cycle, which is intended to be done later, but doesn't have to be, and I'll come back to that point, is about assessment design. So how are we understanding what our students, children in front of us know? What are they able to do? And then how do we interact around that to make sure that that learning continues? So the second cycle is 3 to 5 lessons. Again, a choice for the candidate. And then goes from there. And we look at what we call informal assessments or formative, student self-assessment, and then formal assessment or summative assessment. So we're looking across how we're using multiple modes of assessment to make a judgment then about your next steps as a teacher with these students, right? So that's cycle 2. They were developed in this manner to become more complex in the second, meaning that the first would be done in the first semester, second following it. But you can do these in any order you want to. And so that, again, has always been a choice point depending on program design. And again, we'll get into some of that. So again, 2 instructional cycles in the model with the intent that one would be done, feedback would be given, coaching would happen, and then they would engage in the segment. So the next 3 slides, I'm going to move across very quickly here. It is a history of performance assessment. We always start with this when we're working with our educators across the state, because it's so important to know where we started and how far we've come in the state of California, a true leader in this country around performance assessment. So back all the way in 1998, when we introduced SB 2042 and that work, that established performance assessment requirements in California. So quite a number of years ago. When we get to 2008, we see it move out of being voluntary to being required. So it was in the field for 8 years before it was ever required of a candidate. So lots of time to learn. We move on and look at the development from then. In 15, 16, we got some funding to come back and relook at the Cal TPA that was originally developed and revise that. Some of you were part of that work. And then we also were asked to build a performance assessment for administrators at the same time. And so that came online. As we move forward then in time, they determined that the performance assessment should not just be for multiple subject, single subject and world language teachers, but it should expand into our 5 education specialist credentials. So we began that work and we have 5 distinctly different performance assessment models for our 5 different education specialist credentials that are under development. Currently, the mild to moderate and the extensive support needs are required. The other 3 for our low incidence areas are currently under development and will be required starting in the fall of 25. Then we moved on and we're asked to think deeply about how it was that our early childhood educators could come into this world of thinking about performance assessment and that demonstration of practice. So we built a formative model truly in that it has no passing standard assigned for our early childhood education permit candidate. student teachers. And so that is now also available. It's online right now on the commission's website. You can always take a look at that if you were interested in what we did with our early childhood educators. And then we were asked to move into the world of literacy under SB 488. And in that work, we needed to reopen and relook at all of our performance assessment models and infuse what SB 488 sets forward around literacy instruction in the state of California. So we have been working on that as well. And by the time we get to the fall of 2025, we will have that infused into all of our multiple subjects and our 5 ed specialist credential areas, and our brand new PK to 3 credential that we also introduced along the way, who also are required to take and pass a performance assessment. And of course, these assessments need to be specific to the credential authorizations. So in the commission's model work, they are all unique assessments. And that brings us up to date. And here we are with you. And here we are in 2024 in our second RDI TPA worker. So that's a little history. So we're going to move along here. Get to our next slide. Again, I'm going to just spend a little time on the critical concepts behind the 2 instructional cycles. So again, as I mentioned earlier, in cycle 1, 1 lesson, and there's a selection of focus students that we ask teacher to think about. So it's about 1 lesson and how do you differentiate for 3 types of learners. So 1 needs to be an English language learner, but that goes along a continuum, of course. We're all learning English, even probably to this day. We are all English learners. All children and students are English learners. If you're an identified English learner, you probably need more support. So we'd like to see how you're doing that for that student or child. A child who's on an IEP 504 or a gifted and talented plan, a child who has a specialized learning need, how are you supporting that child? And the third is a child who has some type of need that could have been created either in or outside of school around some kind of issue that may have been traumatic for that child, or may just be something about that child that you are curious about, you'd like to learn more about, and you would like to attend to. It could be emotional, it could be social, it could be academic, it could be a whole range of things, but for those 3 types of children. And then how do you monitor their learning? And how do you provide important actionable feedback? And then finally, how you establish those content-specific learning expectations. So we call them learning goals. How do you set your learning goals? And of course, the learning goals must be tied directly to the Department of Education's grade level by grade level, developmentally appropriate set of standards and the frameworks that have been developed around what kinds of opportunities our children and students should have at every grade level that they come through in our public and private school settings. So that's cycle 1. Cycle 2. In cycle 2, we get into what we call a series of lessons. So we understand and hope that you are farther along in your teacher development, that you've had clinical practices now, you really deeply know the students you're working with, and you're going to tell us about 3 to 5 lessons. It's your choice. You can tell us about 3, 4, or 5 lessons. And you're going to talk specifically now, flipping instructional design a little bit over into assessment focus. What are your assessments and how will you monitor and understand that progress around learning for each of your students in your classroom? And there are choices around the number of students and things like that that we'll get into. But in each of these experiences, right, there are sets of rubrics that help guide the expectation for practice. In cycle 2, we ask the teachers to develop a rubric themselves that they would be using to think about how to monitor that progress of learning. So we look for that rubric and that criteria for understanding content and social and emotional growth and development, whatever it is we're looking at to measure. And then how we are making those adaptations for those individual learners. So how are you making those adaptations? How are you using UDL? How are you either accommodating or modifying instruction to make sure you're truly providing access to the content for every student or child in your care? And then feedback, actionable feedback. How is it that you're helping the student understand what they know and what they need to know so they can move their learning forward? And that's what's the importance of including student self-assessment in this cycle back in 2015, 16, 16, 17, because the individual learner needs to know what they know and they need to know what they now need to know, right? in order to be able to ask those important questions about getting more support for them. So that was an important aspect. And then finally, we did take a look at educational technology in this cycle, because of course, in 15, 16, 16, 17, there had been a report that just came out from the Department of Education talking about educational technology and the importance of using that in classrooms. And so that became a part of the design team discussion at the time and a requirement. Show us how you are using educational technology in your classroom to extend learning and build on students' knowledge. So that was part of cycle 2 as well. All right, so a lot already for you to think about. So we want to go through the 4 topical areas and talk about how it is that we have put forward that and how the different and multiple set of educators that have built these assessments with the commission, they think about this being formative in nature. So we do have our 2 cycles with the intention of one being done with feedback provided, actionable feedback by faculty, by cooperating teachers to that teacher credentialed candidate, and then engaging in the second cycle. And what you see on the screen here, this is from our LPA work, our literacy performance assessment work. And what you're seeing here is how across the 6 domains in cycle 1, we're looking at elements to measure. So a big part of our work in our 2-year design process with a group of educators to build a performance assessment for the commission's models. We begin by looking at the TPEs and elements and determining which are most prominently required at the beginning teaching. So excuse me for saying beginning teachers, but it is at the beginning, the start of your education. What must you absolutely need to know to move into a classroom and become the teacher of record? And so we sort through the TPEs and the TPE elements and determine what is measurable in a performance assessment, what is expected. If it's not in the performance assessment, of course, and you'll hear more about this from our colleagues at the back table as we get into accreditation, all TPEs and all elements, of course, should be presented to teacher candidates to learn, to practice, to learn, to demonstrate. But the performance assessment can't measure all of that. That would be impossible. So there are specific elements that are identified by your colleagues, your educators, and teachers who have worked on these. And then this is what we are looking at in our second cycle. So you can see quickly, maybe, that there is some overlap between the 2 cycles. That's intentional, but then there are unique parts of both instructional cycles. So in this model, you must complete and pass both cycles to say that you have completed the entire performance assessment. And these are the elements in which you are going to be given feedback around your practice. And what you see in the second one is this addition of TPE 7. Because that is the new domain that was added around literacy instruction. And you can see how, as we move forward into our LPA model, that will have cycle 1, same structure, 1 lesson differentiation. And cycle 2 now, however, will be in literacy and will deal with these elements around literacy, particularly foundational reading skills, as well as those additional themes around meaning making, content development, etc. So we're moving from a current set of models into this world of infusing literacy, and we're doing it in cycle 2 because it's 3 to 5 lessons, more opportunity for the teacher to demonstrate what they know and are able to do around teaching reading in California.
Excuse me, as a person who spent about 5 years teaching teacher candidates, working with them as a TPA coordinator, faculty, with both pre-service and intern teachers, candidates can use a lot of what they do in cycle 1 for cycle 2. So building upon the, the work that they've done, some of the questions and concerns and pieces that they're looking at are identical when they go from cycle 1 to cycle 2. I have to tell the candidates, you don't just upload the forms from cycle 1 for cycle 2, you need to copy and paste and move it over. But because they build on each other, the candidates are not doing 2 brand new things. They are really doing something that builds on the next step. So we progress from that 1 lesson to that unit. So starting from here and building out here. And when I talk to candidates, they're like, I would have really liked to have started working on this, a while ago. I was like, well, you weren't there yet. You weren't quite there yet. You needed to start here small and then build out to get to building 3 to 5 lessons. I had a candidate once that I asked them to bring in a lesson plan, and then we were going to talk about differentiating it. And the candidate brought a lesson plan that would have taken probably 6 weeks to complete, right? Didn't understand that you couldn't cover this concept in a 45-minute period. And I was telling, I was like, where did you, this is a teacher prep program I'm not working with in-service teachers. We need to start here, and we need to start small and build out. And so that's how those pieces are formative. We start small, we build out, and it's amazing what folks can do, especially when they look at what they did and are able to look at their cycle 2 and the creativity they're able to infuse, and how much fun it is for kiddos and student and the candidate to work together, and they can see their growth over time.
All right. So time is always the enemy. I'm going to have to move a lot more quickly with you now. But hopefully we were able to anchor you a bit in the structure of the model. Remember, for every credential type, it is very specifically designed. So on this next slide, what you see is our 5-level rubrics. We have 8 rubrics in cycle 1. We have 9 rubrics in cycle 2. They are analytic in nature in that they are specifically tied to specific TPEs that are always listed at the bottom of the rubric. These rubrics are shared with candidates, and they're formative in that you can see the rubrics. We encourage rubrics to be looked at, studied, discussed, language understood before the assessment process begins so that they understand exactly what we're looking for. You can see there are 5 levels, starting with we don't have evidence all the way up to truly comprehensive and advanced practice. You can see there's like a chunk of text and then another chunk of text. These are constructs, we call them. And a candidate needs to demonstrate each one of these constructs to stay at a level 3. If they're not all there at level 3, they move down potentially to a level 2. If we don't see that evidence, they could be a level 1. If they do show us all the construct evidence in level 3, we now can consider, are you level 4? And if you show us that, then we can consider, are you a level 5? So to get to a 5, you have to show us all of 3, all of 4, and 5. But all of this is transparent and in the hands of candidates even before, hopefully, they begin their assessment. So let's move on. It's embedded in program. We have talked with programs for the last 9 years about embedding this work in their programs, in the coursework, in the clinical practice, and using this in a way that often feels unique to many who have come through public education, but that you could have something that is summative in nature and formative, but also used simultaneously to count as credit in a course. And we have worked on this concept for quite some time. And continue to encourage that. But in this graphic, you see how we have this overlapping Venn diagram, and we look to see this practice of planning, teaching and assessing, reflecting on your practice and applying what you've learned across your clinical practice and coursework. And programs are hopefully providing multiple formative opportunities for candidates to prepare, doing this, practicing it over and over before they even think that they're ready to submit their work. It's formative around continuous improvement, and candidate preparation programs have access to who's registered, all the scores that come out, and we score every month, and data comes to programs every month of the year. They can get all of this data inside of a program that's called Results Analyzer, and someone can manipulate that data and get it every single way they would like to. And this provides that up-to-date data for programs so that they can be looking at these analytic rubrics at the rubric level, at the TPE level, and truly understanding what are the challenges for our candidates? What might we turn back to program design and attend to? Moving on, secondary passing standard. As you all know, in December of 2023, the commission took action to adopt a secondary passing standard. What this does is provides the opportunity for someone who has scored within a point or two of the passing standard to marshal additional evidence and potentially move forward. What we would never want to do is give a score assignment to a candidate that was in fact due to error. So by applying a standard error measure, what you're doing is you're absorbing some of that error in the data, and you're saying if you're within a point or two, it could be that there was some type of error creating that score point. We're going to give you this chance to marshal more evidence. Let's move you forward. So that's how this works. And this is now in place and will be in place going forward for performance assessments in California. Now, the other important point on this slide is it's formative in that, again, in this new language that's coming forward, what is happening in the performance assessment work in teacher preparation should be picked up involved in a collaborative dialogue between the teacher candidate and the faculty and hopefully the cooperating teacher around what next steps, what actionable next steps might this teacher candidate pursue as they move into induction, where they get 2 more years of support from a mentor and coach, and how we bridge that gap of what happened in teacher candidate development into the next 2 years of development and induction, right? In California, we're lucky to have 3 years of teacher development opportunity. This is not typical across the states. This is a unique aspect of California work, and the work that happens in teacher credentialing in those programs needs to come up into what's happening now in induction, right? When we flip out of that work and into practice. So important. And you want to add?
Actually 3 to 5 years, right? Because some folks can come in as interns. If you're a district intern, you could be in a program for 3 years and then still get 2 years of induction. So it's a really wonderful opportunity. And as a program sponsor who recommended a candidate with the secondary passing standard, I had seen her, I had observed her for 3 years in her classroom and saw all the wonderful things she did and noticed the one thing that she did not do on the teacher performance assessment. And I was able to certify to those pieces, and we had a good conversation about it. And when we developed her IDP, and she's now in induction, that's what she's going to focus on, this one part. So that's one of the wonderful things about the secondary.
Making it informative. All right, so these are some things we would offer to you that we are hoping are formative in nature. We're going to move on now to valid and authentic. So, valid and authentic. Yesterday, you got introduced to and perhaps already knew all about the assessment design standards. And by the way, when those were introduced years ago, they have evolved over multiple years here because as we continue to develop different types of credentials, we need to revisit and revise our assessment design standards. So this slide just sort of points out how we have addressed these different standards around validity and fairness, reliability, and calibration. We'll get into that with our assessors and our assessor pools and our 3 levels of assessors, et cetera. And then of course, sponsor model responsibilities around making sure information is clear, information is available. We have a website, we have lots of opportunities there, and we'll talk about that. So don't want to get too happy to have you read that on your own. So again, back to connection with the Department of Education standards and frameworks. So important that our independent standard setting board, the commission, work hand in hand with the Department of Education, because our teachers are coming in through getting credentialed and moving into districts to work, which are under the purview of the Department of Ed, who has set very clear expectations by grade level that are developmentally appropriate for our children and students in California. So we don't ever want someone coming into our profession to think that teacher credentialing is different than what we now expect once you're a teacher in the classroom, right? We want that articulation to be very clear from our professionals coming in. So all of the work in the teaching performance assessment, and even more so in our LPA model, are tightly woven to the expectations that are set forward by the Department of Ed. Embedded in teacher preparation. I can't say this enough. We really want ongoing feedback from faculty and peers to be engaged in this work with the candidate as they move through the process of performance assessment. Structured support in coursework, alignments, and even down to the glossary we provide and making sure that in coursework we're using the same words to talk about teaching and learning. That has been a really important finding that we started to learn a lot about in our beginning teacher support and assessment program years ago, about having a common lexicon, a way to talk about teaching together can help us all move forward. And so having a glossary of that is so important. Again, in our clinical practice with our candidates, remember 600 hours spread across time in classrooms with actual children and students. And these assessments have to be done in those classroom settings, by the way. You can't round up the neighborhood children and teach them and then submit that. We have definitely seen that come through, and we give that back and say, let's try again. So plan selecting your focus students, supporting instructional choices, teaching and assessing, reflecting on your practice, and determining those important next steps. So the things through our teaching performance expectations that were validated by educators in California, these are the things we think teachers should be doing in the classroom. Planning asset-based instruction that's culturally and linguistically responsive. Teaching, engaging with students and assessing, reflecting on practice and applying what they learn. That's what we understand and, shift as we need to, as we understand what's happening in our schools in California. Valid and authentic again around credential specific adaptations. So again, in the commission's models, we are very carefully looking at the teaching performance expectations that are tied specifically to the authorization of the specific credential that will be given to a teacher, and then building a performance assessment that maps to those most important TPE elements that we think that first step into the classroom teacher must need to be able to manage, handle as they begin their career in teaching. So each of these are unique. Moving to the next slide. Collaborative and process. So the performance assessment work was developed by educators for educators. And we had subject matter experts involved, commissioners, as well as faculty, cooperating teachers. Each design team was made up of 20, 30 educators, and we always had liaisons from the Department of Education and everything like that. So again, in the commission model, every single version has always come through a 2-year process with at least 20 to 30 educators and instructors of teacher educators to inform the work. So next slide. Would add anything?
I was gonna say, it's a group like this that came together
Yes.
and created these things, so looking around, it's very familiar.
So again, here we are back at our rubrics. We just wanted to just again make sure, and really we'll have to leave this up to you to take a closer look, but each of our analytic rubrics has 5 levels. We always start our assessor scoring by saying we have an essential question that focuses what we're measuring. Look at level 3 first. We find the evidence, we map to the evidence. If we have the evidence, level 3. If we don't, are they a level 2? If we don't have level 2 evidence, are they a level 1? If we have the evidence at level 3, we go up to 4 and then go up to 5. And add anything?
I would say this space 3s get degrees, right? That's what new teachers need to be able to do. And so focusing on those and moving forward.
So we want to talk a little bit about how we have developed our assessor pool over the years. So we have a very strenuous review process, and you have to meet qualifications, be invited in to come into the calibration and training. So we set out the qualifications for assessors. We are constantly looking for assessors and inviting them in, both TK to 12, now pre-K to 12, and those who teach teachers in our methods classes and what have you. And you have to meet the criteria to be invited in, and then you come through scoring training. We did all of this in person prior to the pandemic, and then have been moving it more to an online environment and experience. But assessors use evidence-based analytic rubrics to ensure the accuracy. Everything is tied to those rubrics. We must have evidence of the construct in the rubric to make that important. It's a 2-day process to train, and this ensures consistency across our assessors to the best of our ability, equity, and validity. And we search for a diverse set of assessors, always trying to match and meet the diversity of our teacher candidates. In addition to this training that occurs in this 2-day, they have to actually score independently, meet that score, those pre-scored judgments, and then they're considered calibrated. But calibration wears off. So if you're not scoring, you're not calibrated. And so we have worked into our system ways to monitor that. Every assessor is monitored. Every time they open a submission to read, we can see what they're doing. We know how long they take to score it. We know if they're scoring too quickly. They are not allowed to score more than 4 a day. They are not allowed to score if they haven't scored for weeks or months at a time. They have to recalibrate. They come to monthly meetings and go through and discuss and pre-scored papers, and then discuss their scores so that they can make sure that they're staying calibrated, and we watch all of that. And we report on iterated reliability, it's called, making sure that our assessors, when given a pre-scored paper, are making the same type of judgments about that work, so that we can make sure we're being consistent as we use our California educators to score the commission's model. And then what we call validity meetings are really around reliability, but they're looking at, again, and having discussions together as educators about teacher performance as they look at these submissions. So our assessors often talk about the power of this as professional development for them as they look at that range of performance coming in from teachers across the state, and they can really look at these differences and think about them together as educators, and then turn that finding back to the program. So again, got to move on. So data-driven improvements. We have qualitative and quantitative data in an ongoing manner across every year, every single year, starting, let's see, 15, 16, 16, 17, so 17, 18, in feedback collected, you know, something wasn't clear, a rubric word needed to be changed. We are on version 7 of the commission's model, the Cal TPA, because we have tried every year to listen carefully to our candidates and our assessors and our coordinating teachers and our cooperating teachers, and tweaking the language, making things more clear, making sure what's expected in the rubric is clearly asked for in the assessment. So it may be driving people nuts that we have different versions every year, but I think it is so important that we are clear to our candidates about what we move on. How is it reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom settings? So lots and lots of candidate choice, because every context out there in our 1,000+ school districts and all the ways that we invite children and students to come in and learn in California is contextually different. So we want as much flexibility and choice as we can possibly have in a performance assessment. So let's talk about this for a minute. So lots of choices: math, ELA literacy, ELD standards, core content connectors can all be used and looked at and connected to in the learning. These are all choices the candidate makes. There's a lot of choice around using district adopted materials, because if you are an intern or you are in a teacher prep program that's tightly involved in the local school districts, you want to be using those materials. You don't want to learn how to do something over here and have it be completely foreign when you get into the classroom. So always want to be open to that. How many students you work with? Often flexible choices here, and especially as we came into our education specialist work, knowing that our education specialists are often intern teachers and also often itinerant teachers working with individual case studies. So we had to allow them to work with one student versus a group of students. And then group size, reteaching, or extending lessons. So in cycle 2, the outcome of cycle 2 is, after you look at all your assessment data, do I reteach because my students haven't met the learning goal, or do I extend their learning because I have? So lots of choices there, all for the candidate to decide. Now, what I'm going to do is power through a couple of these tables here. I invite you to look at the X's. Every time you see an X, that's a choice point for a candidate to make. So we wanted to try and show you, and we see here in the left-hand column, when we say operational cycle 1, that is the current cycle that's in place, understanding that we're moving to a new cycle in 2025, and new math work in our early childhood, but we'll talk about that. So anyway, in step 1, lots of choices about whether you use the template we provide you for the lesson plan or you use a local one. And again, over here in step 4, you have a choice to either write about your application, or you can video record yourself telling us about it. This came up in topic yesterday and in the first meeting about why is there so much writing? This is something we came into the 2015-16 design team with and said, how do we make this not about being a writing assessment? What can we do to use multiple modalities of performance and demonstration? So we have tried to build in as much as possible the opportunity for a candidate to audio record or video record themselves responding to prompts if they do not care to write to them. And that's where you see the X's there. So let's move on to the next slide. This is around group size. Again, depending on the type of credential and authorization you're seeking, will depend on the kind of support you're providing, whether it's to a whole class or to small groups of students or to an individual. It has been important to our design team and was, again, very important to the LPA design team that we're currently working with. We're in the 2nd year of development, that a teacher know how to work with a whole class of students, as well as a small group of students. And of course, individual differentiation. But where you see X's, there are choices. Moving to the next slide. Again, lots of choices here across the credential types and assessments. Full class, small group, individual. Again, just have to move here with you. In the slide, you're seeing all the different ways in the video recording. We need to see the teacher teaching and we need to see the students. This is how many students we may need to see. up to you to decide. And teacher candidate, up to you to decide. And then in cycle 2, same thing, lots of choices here across the different credential types in the clips. 4 clips are required in the LPA, but how many students we need to see is a choice point. And if it's in blue, you can see one and one. We have lots of candidates in California who are bilingual. Fantastic, amazing that we are not more so for, wanting really very much to support our bilingual classrooms. And so in the commissions model, you may submit your work in the language of instruction. However, the ed code says you also need to know how to teach in English. And so there are things that must be submitted in English, but there are things that must be and maybe if you want to submit it in the language of instruction. And that's what you're seeing here on this slide. And then here on the next slide in cycle 2. So lots of choices here. Now, interestingly enough, we do get a number of submissions that come in the language of instruction. Often it is Spanish, but we have definitely seen a wide range of instruction in multiple languages. As you know, we have over 23 different languages, multiple languages spoken in our school, lots of immersion programs out there, lots of different models around bilingual work. And so we want to support all that for our candidates. And this is how they have choices around it. So just wanted to. All right, we're going to move on. Anything you want to add there around choices for implementation? Are you sure? All right, I know, I'm already over time. I apologize. Cal TPA appropriate for beginning teachers. And again, we want to cross out that word beginning and say teacher. Appropriate for teacher candidates. We have our rubrics. Rubrics are things that need to be known about in front of the assessment happening. So what am I expected to do? Let me look at that rubric. Let me understand it. We have level 3 is really reflecting what that essential question is pointing out. And we, of course, have our 2 cycle structure. We've talked quite a bit about that. I invite you to take a real look at. By the way, both of these instructional cycles are provided for you in your resources, and you can look at every single prompt and every single requirement, all the rubrics are provided for you. So I think this came up too in conversation. How do we help the community move through this performance assessment, which is complex, dictated by our assessment design standard? We have what is called an assessment guide. It looks a lot like this document, which we built for faculty. Step by step. Lots of supports around how to engage in the 4 steps. And then for the teacher candidates, it's broken down step by step, prompt by prompt. And candidates are given these guides as soon as they register for the assessment. And we encourage programs to take them apart and use them in all the kinds of ways that they do. Marissa, if we had more time, could talk to you quite eloquently about the amazing ways that she has worked with her candidates to pull apart these assessment guides and really embed it in her program. Yes.
Real quick, got about 8 minutes. Still hopefully get to the data. Just wanted to give you that.
All right, so let's just skip over this and move on. We also really talk a lot about mitigating bias. It's incredibly important when you're working with actual educators to score other educators' work. You want to be able to identify your bias. You want to be able to try and set it aside. You want to mitigate that. We will never eliminate bias. Bias is always with us. So things about bias, what do? We have our guides and rubrics all reviewed by yet another set of identified educators. We have a group called our Bias Review Committee that review all of our exams and assessments in California. In our 2-year design cycle, the Bias Review meets and reviews everything, every word of every document we produce to give us feedback, to make sure that we are not putting out stereotypes, that we're not disadvantaging or offending a candidate in any way. And we take all that feedback and we bring that back to our design teams and we attend to it so that we can mitigate that bias. And that happens twice in the design and in an ongoing manner as we continue to talk about bias with our assessors over the year as they come through and score everything out month after month. So even when we have a new design team, like if we were working with all of you to develop a performance assessment for a particular credential type, we would ask you to come through our bias training because even in our own work, we all bring our own bias. So a lot of work there. And of course, everything we produce on the web or paper product is all ADA compliant, as it must be, to make sure that we're making sure every type of candidate is accessing the material and has access to material. So let's move on. Implicit bias training, monthly assessor validity. We recruit a diverse assessor pool from across the state. You must be a California educator to score these California teacher candidate assessments. We have a quality management plan that outlines our processes that we follow around calibration standards. We have double scoring processes to assure accuracy and mitigate bias. 10% of our submissions are always double scored, meaning 2 separate individual people score it, and we mitigate those scores. If we need a third assessor, that happens. 100% of submissions around the cut score, that's standard, 19 points that you needed to get to out of 35, and that's standard of 21 points you needed to get to out of 40. If you are around that, it's double scored. And now, of course, we have our new error of measurement, so we have that new process as well. We limit how many you can score a day, and we trace that accuracy, and we monitor the rate of scoring, et cetera. So as I always tease our assessors when we train them, we're with you all the time. We are always watching what you're doing. We certainly have shut assessors out, and we bring them back in, of course, because we're in a training model, we're educators, and we retrain you, we rework with you, we work with you until you're ready to get back in there and calibrate and score in the most consistent and fair way to a candidate. We have 3 levels of assessors.
5-minute warning.
We have 5 minutes.
I would jump to the data if I were you and let them know we've got some.
All right. Yes, so we invite you to check out all the resources in your narrative that you received. Every other page is missing, so we'll get you the complete copy there so you actually have access to all the resources. So let's look at some data. Are we ready for that? We have offered you a lot this morning. Attempts, we wanted to look at pass rates. So what you see here on the screen in front of you, year by year, are the number of candidates who have submitted, remember, 2 cycles. You have to take and pass both cycles to pass the Californians, and the number who have passed. Year by year. All above 9. We move on, let's look at first attempt data, right? So we have candidates who pass on the first attempt, many do. We have candidates that take it a second time and pass. We have some candidates who need a third attempt. So that's the data in front of you here. And the thing that we can look at this data is if we start, let's just look at the top row of all. You can see we had a 73% pass rate on first attempt in 21-22. It's stable in 22-23. Brent yesterday brought up the whole issue about the pandemic. Let's remember when that happened and the impact on performance assessment. But you can see that we're now coming out of that a bit. And as we get to 23-24, for all of our candidates, we're seeing a growth of first time pass rate jump to 78%. Would we like to see it higher? Yes, of course we would. Because this is untimed and it's open book. And you don't need to submit this until you've met level 3. We'd like to see our first time pass rates grow. But that's the data there for you to take a look at. Let's move on. Cycle 1 on first attempt cycle. So we're looking now particularly in cycle 1. Then we're going to look particularly at cycle 2. So again, we have the data for you on first attempt, second attempt, third attempt. You can see the numbers decreasing. Total who passed. And we have numbers here in our final column about not yet passed. These are candidates that sit in our registration system. And by the way, when you register, your registration is good for 12 months. So it's hard for us to track the data sometimes, but we can see who's registered and who has not yet taken it. And those are the numbers that you see in that far column. Have they taken it? I can't tell you because the data shifts every single day of the year. Because things come in every single month of the year and we score every single month of the year. So this data is constantly evolving and we look at it consistently as an internal team and share back to programs what we're seeing in the data. This is cycle 2. You can see we have less who have not yet passed. Sitting in there waiting, they have 12 months if they just registered yesterday to take and complete this. The other thing that it is important to point out is that for the last 2 years, the governor has funded exam and assessment fee. So you need to remember for the last 2 years, no one paid to take a performance assessment. or an exam that counted. And that had an interesting impact. We don't have time to talk about it today, but happy to talk about it another day with you at any time at all you want to call me. Then we're looking at first time and all attempt pass rates for multiple subject, single subject, world language candidates, right? So remember, we have lots of versions now, but this is only for multiple subject, single subject, and world language. And oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, remember our single subject candidates are not held to SB 488 around literacy development. So they will not have a different version of the LPA in 2025. They will have a, we're always in continual improvement. They will have an updated version 8, but it will not include literacy. Anyway, so here we are looking at this rolled up data, and we're looking at percent pass on all attempts. So when we say all attempts, we're rolling up that data and looking at who passed this assessment. See the pass rates there by ethnicity. So for all, 97% have passed, and down that's all. Number of submissions receiving. So here's a point of interest for all of you, what are called condition codes. And condition codes are assigned to submissions that come in that are basically incomplete, have missing information, or have information submitted that is not responsive to the prompts. We don't want to score that. We don't want to be making score judgments about evidence that is not what we asked for. That would be inappropriate. So we give it back to the candidate with a condition code that helps them understand what exactly was missing. And we will get this handout into your hands. We have many. Each year we create another condition code or two because we want to be very specific with candidates about what it was that was missing, so that faculty can get in there and work with them and get them to resubmit and have that. So condition codes assigned. You can see starting in 2019, 2020, we had about 9%. It has fluctuated and grown. You can see in our pandemic years, it increased a bit, and we're starting to come out of that and stabilize it a little bit. Going to the next slide, number of submissions receiving non-scorable condition codes by ethnicity. You can take a look there. A point to notice, God bless you, is that in our all row there at the top, 21, 22, that pandemic year coming out, 11%, and then we see it decreasing over time, which is what we want. We constantly work with our programs that use this model and say, we would like to be at 0 condition codes. We don't like to give condition codes, but we're not going to score things that are unscorable. So we have to give them back to the candidate. Let's make sure when the work comes in, it's complete. So cycle 2, again, a few more condition codes. We believe what's happening here is that it is more complex in cycle 2. We ask for a bit more from the candidate, and we're seeing work come in that's just not quite complete. So again, it's of great concern to us internally at the commission. We'd really like to see us get a lot less coming in the door. Anyway, so let's go to the next slide. So what you're seeing here is what, so you might be sitting there thinking to yourself, so what is it that they're not doing? What's happening? What are we seeing? And again, remember, we provide this data back to programs. So what you see in this graphic is for 21, 22, which is the blue bar, 22, 23, which is the orange bar, and 23, 24, that's the green bar. If we just start over on the far right and look at A9, highest bars there, the blue bar was very high, 21, 22. And this was around establishing English language development learning goals. Submissions are coming in without them. We have worked hard with our programs on this. We have talked to our candidates directly in our candidate office hour and everything else about this. And you can see that we have made progress. And as we come into 23, 24, we're seeing a lot less condition codes around English language development goals being established for our children and students in California. So that's great. The other one that we're seeing here is that some candidates, there's a group of candidates who will send in a submission that across all 4 steps, they just have a lot of things missing. It's a small number, but these are clearly candidates that aren't getting the support they need. They're just sending it in with the hope that they can pass, and we have to give it back because there are multiple missing parts. That is our other issue, and that's A99, the other high. But again, you can see there, the trend is going down. We're getting more substantial submissions as we go through time and have worked on this issue with our programs. So Again, A8 again comes up as the ELD standards. We look at, this is an interesting one. I always scratch my head over this, but we have candidates who upload to the wrong credential area. And so because in our system, assessors must be credential specific. If it comes in as a multiple subject submission, but it's really mild to moderate submission, we have to give it back so they can resubmit it. And when we can intervene and just move it, we do that. We always weigh on the side of candidates. And then A1 is the last one. Submission requirements are just not met. In other words, it just comes in a very sort of discombobulated way. It's just not what it needs to be. We're not seeing what we need. And this is one of those things really, sadly, that we saw in the 2 years of fee waivers, was that a lot of kids just sent stuff in. And it was clearly not very helpful, but we didn't have to pay for it. So what was the risk? You know, let's give it a shot. Let's try and pass. Some additional condition codes for you in this next slide. Video clips came up yesterday for a while. We do sometimes see video clips where we don't see the teacher, we don't see the students, we can't score that. Condition codes related to video clips being edited. Candidates are asked to let it run. You can't edit out the child who decides to have a conversation in a way that's not appropriate in a classroom, right? You don't get to edit it. It is what it is. You're the teacher. Let's see you engage. So when they do edit it and put in music and titles, and we have to or if we can't see it, so we'll get videos we can't open. We get videos that have no sound, and that's unfortunate. I do want you to understand, when we ask them to upload and submit, they must open every single document. They must look at their video, and then they can submit it. If they don't open it and look at it, they can't submit it. So candidates are moving fast. Maybe they waited till midnight and they're just hitting submit, submit, submit. That's the only thing I can think of, because otherwise, why would you? So we do try as hard as we can to help our candidates in all the ways that we can every day. And that concludes our presentation.
Now it is time.
I apologize for going over the 45.
That is okay.
It's okay.
Now it is time to open it up for questions. Beverly.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of info. And I just have one quick question, just about the last thing on the condition code. I appreciate that you break it out by ethnic group, but it seems like it would also be interesting and useful if you broke it out by programs. That if there are programs that don't do it, they have a higher condition code error rate. You probably do that already.
We do that already.
You see programs that are outside.
Oh, yes, 100%. And when we do have outlier programs who either are scoring in ways that we would like to see improve, or we're seeing numbers of condition codes, we work directly with those programs. And we're working on dashboards. And again, this will be something that comes up in meetings to follow this one. Dashboards for programs at the program level. Remember, they're getting all this data. They know what their data is. They know what their condition codes are. Well, they should know. They get the data. And we are building dashboards for them that are easier to interpret with graphics, so they can see in a graphic circle, imagine. So your blue part is passing, your red part is not passing, your orange part is condition codes, so that you can get that picture immediately and take action.
Well, I'm wondering if there's a consequence to the program.
Not yet.
Because now there's fee waivers, but I imagine that when a candidate gets a condition code, they have to pay the fee again.
That is correct. So one of the
If the
things,
program is not offering action or they're having too high condition code submissions, there should be a consequence for them, either in accreditation or in some other way, that they're held responsible for submit without a condition code error.
I'm with you on that.
It's a follow-up question to Beverly's session. Will the dashboards be made available to the public so people enrolling in programs will be aware of the pass rate?
And I can call my colleagues back at the back table to speak to this if they want to, but there are current dashboards available on data now and have been.
By program. They're available to public.
Some is internal data, some is public data. Cheryl, do you want to? Where should I sit? Be Brent.
So Erin Sullivan. Erin is our interim director of professional services for accreditation.
And this is Cheryl Hickey, she's an administrator of accreditation. So yeah, currently we gather a variety of data from programs. Some of it is generated through surveys, some of it comes to us from the programs, some of it comes to us through data that we get from ES, from valuation systems, say environmental systems. We use some of it to populate public dashboards, and the rest of it, that information plus some additional information is available only to the programs at this time. So TPA pass rates, not available on our public facing dashboard right now. But the institutions themselves have that data. And we provide that data to our site visit teams before the site visits, and they have it during the site visit. So, and we tell the institutions, site visit teams for your accreditation, they are going to look at this data. And depending on how it looks, we'll have questions for you about it at your site visit.
So to just follow up my question, it's not available to the public then?
It is.
Can I add something to this?
Yes.
So
Rates are available.
They are available on your.
pass rates are, but not by institution.
By institution.
Are they
They
available?
are. Let me just go back and check. I'm pretty sure they are.
Okay.
Yeah, so part of why we're kind of waffling is because the performance assessment data was sort of the last. We've been building this system over a number of years. We had to build the system, then we had to have institutions provide us with the data related to their programs, like the length, the number of units, the basic information. The performance assessment was sort of the most recent piece that we've added. And so we've been tinkering with it over the last couple of years to get it just right, to make sure that we talked about how to reflect those condition codes, all of that information. So, but yes, so we have dashboards available, both publicly and for institutions and their teams. So, there's a little bit more on that for the accreditation teams and the teams.
Additional question. Benjamin? And
I
then
heard you mentioned ECE, right? And that there's not, if I heard correctly, like not a score associated as true formative, I think is like the book you use. Are you tracking data with that? Like what are the measurements you're utilizing with that? I'm just interested.
So that work is very early in its genesis.
Right.
Our education, our early childhood education permit program structure is very different than our credential structure. Most of these candidates are seeking an associate degree at a community college. So, for example, one difference is they have 3-level rubrics, not 5. We are encouraging programs to try this out. They're not tracking the data. We would love to run a study of getting a number of programs to agree to do it with fidelity. Yeah. Fancy word means do it the way we asked you to do it. And we would love to track that. We don't at this time, we're not there. But it's early in its work, it's available. We would love to do that. We probably will at some point do it.
Can I provide a piece of clarification, just in case anybody is wondering, because we do have a brand new PK3 ECE credential. Amy is talking about our child development permits. So which
are very different.
Start calling ECE permits at some point, but I just want to make sure folks know.
thank you, Erin.
Just a question about the data on the cycle 1 and the cycle 2, first attempt, second attempt, et cetera. You said that the data is always changing. So when is this data that you gave us current as of?
So we try to look at the data from August to July. June 30th.
Yesterday, so.
Yeah.
So is it current as of yesterday or June 30th?
Wait, okay, so help me. Which data are you shooting?
This cycle, I'm looking at the Cal TPA.
I have to call him Xavier, who's online with us from ES, but yeah, which table? This
45, 46.
45.
Yeah.
Past cycle 1 and first attempt, second attempt, third or higher attempt. I believe this is through June 30th of 24. But Xavier, are you online? Like, what's the talking to the angels? His last name? Webb. Yes, hold on. And he would be happy. Sometimes we try and push it into July. We try to get all of it. It is a moving part.
And a follow-up question to that, you said that these students have 12 months, so that's why we're seeing like close to 1,700 in the year 2023. But now, so the ones that are under not yet passed, those that are years before that will not pass, or how do you?
So this is an interesting question that we are very concerned about. What happens to a candidate who takes a cycle and doesn't pass it? We have a lot of good advice in this document about what we'd like you to do. We don't currently have a way, and again, well, they left. We don't currently have a way to truly understand, but we need to understand this question of who enrolls in teacher preparation, who comes through coursework and clinical, engages in performance assessment, and maybe is not successful somewhere along those multiple measures, because there are 3 things you have to do: pass your coursework, pass your clinical practice, pass a performance. Together, you get out, right, with a credential. If not, what happens? Where are they? Do we lose them? Do they drop out of the program? How do we account for that? And so that is something we really need to dig in on, look at more closely, understand more deeply.
Maybe do we know
what's happening?
these folks are intern as traditional candidates?
Oh yeah, we can track everything by pathway. So we know who the residents are, we know who the interns are, we know who the ITEP undergraduate 4-year college candidates are, and we know our traditional 5th years. But again, at the state, it's hard for me and my team to know if someone enrolled. We don't, it's sort of a little outside of our. So it's a good question. Great question.
So did we want to hear from Xavier Webb on the question?
Yes.
Xavier,
Are you there?
and I see Heather and Tina have comments or questions. So Xavier, if you'd like to proceed, and then we will continue with Heather and Tina.
Hello, I am here. I apologize when I joined back as a panelist to be able to do my video and audio. It shut it off and restarted it. So I missed the direct question. So if I can get that question again, I'm happy to answer.
I'd like to pose the question once again, Amy.
Can you go to the, so Xavier, can you see our PowerPoint screen on your okay, we're going to take you to the table, and the question was, it's 45. Yeah, the number of candidates who passed cycle 1, first attempt, second attempt, third or higher attempt, and have not yet passed.
Oh, I was curious as to when this data was current, because it was mentioned earlier that the data is always changing on a daily basis. So the data that you're presenting us, this is current as of when?
I am looking at a file currently that says September 6th.
Can I just add something also this came out of our annual report that we're currently working on. And so if it's for 23-24, that data was run from August 1st to July 25th. So August 1st of 2023 to July 5th of 2024. So when we're talking about annual data, that's when that report was run for.
Thank you, Heather. Tina, did you have a comment?
Yes, actually, I was following up on the previous comment about understanding what kinds of supports candidates get when they have not passed and when they don't ever pass, and actually coming up with some particular way that the commission can require either annually for programs to report on the candidates who haven't passed and give more explanation for what was done with the candidates, what the remediation processes are about, and perhaps even an opportunity for the candidates to express what they experienced in those at those times. Because as we have seen, number one, we miss a lot of candidate voices who don't pass because our survey structure right now can only capture candidates who are applying for a credential. So I think it is critical, as we have said in this room, that the commission establish some sort of process in the annual data collection through accreditation where we can get this information better, as well as we are seeing how critical it is that programs are supporting candidates in this work. And so many of the comments we see in the surveys about candidates' experiences on the TPA that were negative were because they felt like they were alone and it was stressful and redundant and added on to their student teaching, not an integrated part of their student teaching. So.
You, Tina.
Just
that as far as programs reporting back to the commission on those candidates that did not pass, oftentimes a lot of the institutions, the candidates have completed the program and they're still struggling to pass the TPA. And so their emails are not even active in the system anymore for the institution. So the institution really has no way of contacting them. So we're kind of, at least for me in my program, we're waiting. And when I started, we had about 400 candidates coming out of COVID that were just in limbo. We had no idea where they were. And so I personally tracked them down, but there's no other method to do that. So I just wanted to respond to that, Tina. But I did have a question. I wanted to follow back. You know, my years of doing this was the first time I ever heard anyone mention in the process of developing the TPAs, the Cal TPA, that it was created to be initially cycle 1 implemented in 1 semester, feedback provided, and then cycle 2 provided in a later semester. My question is, if that's the initial process of a true formative assessment, why is there still a fail option for cycle 1? Should it be, this is what you did, let's build on that, and then cycle 2? Or it seems to me that if there's still a fail option, that it's not truly a formative assessment piece. So just curious on that.
I'm just wondering about the difference, the ethnicity scores for passing and for the condition codes. I was wondering whether it's, I mean, when we all look at it, it looks like there's a big difference between some groups and others. Is it a statistical difference, and what conversations do you have as providers about that difference that is there?
So Xavier, again, I don't believe we ran significant tests on this last request of data that we were asked for on Friday, did we? I mean, we can. My guess is that the ones that are closer are not significantly different. But Xavier, can you weigh in?
We did not run significant tests on those.
So I can't answer that, but we can answer it for you.
But so then just looking at the data, whether it's statistically significant or not, it seems significant to me. And
exactly.
Do you have those conversations?
100%, yes. So as an internal team, we carefully look at all the data in myriad of ways quarterly, 4 times a year. Because, right, you want, and again, as I pointed out, we score every month. Candidates receive their scores, the commission receives their scores, and the program receives the scores on the same day, 3 weeks after the scoring window, all year long. So we're looking at that data all year. And we're having lots of conversation about that. And we're having conversation with program. The way we take the data findings, we share it back with what we call program coordinators. Every program is asked to identify a person to be responsible for their program to interact with the commission. I think, again, I didn't get to go through our slides of things that we as a staff would like to continue to improve upon in our continual improvement in the system. We had to skip those slides, but one of the things that I would think we need to really unpack and think about together is who is this person playing this role of who gets the data and who shares it back with faculty, and how is that happening in the program? So that's a big question for us, because often we think it's the credential analyst. It is not a faculty person or the dean or anyone else. So anyway, that aside, we look at this carefully, and we do share the data and the outcomes and specifics on rubric level performance with our programs, as well as condition code issues with our programs. And we, during the pandemic, provided these program coordinator outreach meetings 4 times a year. We have slid back to our 2 times a year. So in January and again in June, we provide, a 3-hour professional development input on what's data saying, what's data telling us, programs, what are thoughts for you to have around improvement. And here's what we're seeing at the ethnic level for our different types of candidates or things that need to be paid attention to. Can we study this more? Absolutely. Should we study it more? Absolutely. 100% agree.
Amy, I have a question. So as you're well aware, we've been engaged in extensive conversations over formative in nature and formative specifically versus summative assessments. And so I heard you speak to that, but I was wondering if you could clarify for me more directly how this is a formative assessment in nature.
In nature. Okay, so one of the other handouts you were given this morning, dig in your papers, you'll find it, is around the acceptable supports. And supports that are not, that are highly recommended, and then supports that are not supportable. So I would like to draw your attention to that document because I think, you know, this may be helpful. So it looks like this, guidelines for acceptable. So we absolutely want support candidates during this work. We don't see this as individual work. We see it as collaborative work. We have invited programs to think about that for the last, well, actually, I've been here twice at the commission, so I would say 20 years. But this is a hard concept that you would sit with someone and work through an instructional design and then have them continue to work on that. That's what we ask you to do as programs. So in this document that we have been working with programs on, we talk about the fact that there needs to be this true embedded and weave into your coursework around the language used, the expectations for planning, teaching, reflection, and application, and that this is collaborative work. So we want candidates to be in their clinical practice settings. We want that cooperating teacher to know about this and be engaging to help them think about which students should you work with, what instruction should you be teaching, where are we in the unit of design with this group of kids, what kind of lesson would be a great lesson. We want lessons to be complex, not simple. Because if you're working in a complex way, you're going to show us a lot more about your teaching than if you're going to give us a worksheet. We see a lot of worksheets. So we have always talked about this and have always said to programs, please review the work, engage in the work, discuss the work into your coursework, have peer review, let peers talk to each other, share your work, set up in Canvas ways for people to engage in each other's work and leave notes. Look at the video recordings, let them come into class, discuss those together. Video record everything so that you have lots of opportunity to pick the clips that are most in your practice. This is all approved and hoped for, that no candidate is working on their own ever in this performance assessment environment. But there is a line that we draw. And we talk about acceptable supports here on the second page. And then at the end, we talk about, well, what can you not do? How do you draw that line between being a coach and taking over and answering the question? We don't want you. I know you guys can teach. That's why you're here in this room. I don't need to know that again, but I need to know if Marissa has that capacity to start demonstrating the kinds of knowledge, skills, and abilities we'd like to see her to have so she can be successful and stay in teaching when she gets into that first job. But I need to talk with her all the time about it. I want to look at her work. We hope programs are reading these submissions. We are very clear that they are not doing that. But many are. And we have lots of examples of programs that have built their program actually around this frame. And we see really interesting outcomes there. So anyway, that being said, I don't know if I'm getting at this, but our intent had always been, particularly keeping the two instructional design, was that it would be, even though it had to be summative because it had to be legally defensible, because it had to be tied to a license decision, we still wanted it to be very formative in nature for the individual candidate. So that's what we do. Is that helpful?
Yep, that's helpful. So just so that everybody's aware, we have a comment from her, we have a comment from Mandy, we have a comment from Tina, and then Adam. Go right ahead.
Okay. I had a process question I've been hanging on to for sometimes, so it's sort of disconnected at this point, but I wanted to swing back to the bias, and I wanted to.
All right, we are back. So Matt, I'd like to go ahead and pose your comment or question.
We never responded.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead. Thank you for that, Amy.
No, that's okay. So on bias, the bias review committee, an external set of educators teachers and faculty identified by the commission and appointed who sit as a committee that looks at all of our exams and performance assessments. In our work of a 2-year design model, they look at it twice. And they're looking for a whole array of things. And Xavier, you're online again. I don't know if you want to talk specifically, but we make sure that the representation on the bias review committee, again, is aware of the credential type for the performance assessment we're building. If it's if we're looking at our low incidence models, for example, we need to bring in our deaf and hard of hearing community to make sure that we're not using language in a way that is at all inappropriate or misleading or wrong, frankly. So that is a lot of what they do. They are not a committee that looks at content. See, they only look for the way we have used language to express an idea. Okay. Is that helpful? And I can get you more explicit information. I can get you like the application we use and things like that, but we are constantly looking for people to join that group. So if you're interested, have you on the bias? Love that.
I would love more. I'd love to follow up with that. Okay.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Matt.
Thank you for the presentation. I kind of want to zoom out a little bit. My guess is that you were given specific prompts to respond to. And I just want to give you an opportunity to maybe speak beyond that if you like with my question. So if you look through the comments and things, it doesn't seem like a lot of candidates are screaming that this is a formative in nature. It doesn't sound like they're learning much from it. There's not a lot of people with given the stress and maybe the negative experiences they have. It doesn't seem like it's maybe appropriate in their eyes. So I guess I'm wondering, what value does this add to teacher candidates, to preparation programs, just the profession in general?
Let's see. I can't speak for individual candidates. So I think what you don't have here is the voice of a candidate who came through this successfully. And that's unfortunate. But
the survey data was from the people who were applying for their credential.
Which survey are you referring to?
Sorry, the ones we were given. It's appendix C.
The CTA survey. I didn't design that. Would you like to speak to the CTA?
Sure. So I'm happy to speak to any piece of data in the data packet that I provided. So the CTA survey, those are people that passed their TPA, went on to become successful teachers, and are practicing in the profession. So they are people that did do the TPA, did pass the TPA.
And Adam, who developed that survey, and was it tested for validity at all?
I can't speak more to that. Just that it was a survey of teachers that had credentials within their first year.
So some of the people in there presumably did complete the Cal TPA.
About half, 50-50. There are no fast in that sample, but it is half Cal TPA half.
So I guess I'm just wondering, what value does this add? Like, why are we doing this? I guess that's what I'm curious with the 97% passing rate. Maybe you can just speak to why you think this is an important thing for
me personally.
Maybe
I can talk for hours.
Help me start on that. So since this became a requirement for earning a credential score, that was 2008. The legislature moved it from fully locally scored and formative. They needed to be scored, but that informed a recommendation for a credential. But it became in 2008, the legislature said this needs to count in a more specific way. So since 2008, I had 3 models in place. So I am estimating, gross estimate, maybe 100,000 teachers have been credentialed since then and passed it, because you couldn't have gotten a credential unless you passed it. So, so it's a large number of people. We don't typically hear from the people who said, I did it, I completed my program, I'm in a classroom, I love my life. Yeah, it was helpful, it was hard, it was stressful. Those aren't the folks that we heard from. We heard from people who struggled. And it's really important for us to hear that struggle and understand to the extent possible what specific struggle did you experience, each candidate, so that we can go back and look, where's the system driving them? for creating that as a strong potential for candidates that have a bad experience, like clipping videos, like I can't remember some of the things, but I mean, there are a lot of issues that come in, but there are a lot of people who have taken and passed this who, when they responded to their survey that's on the commission's website about did you receive support and was that support adequate for completing your TPA, the answers are pretty good. Those are in the 80s and above. 80% of people who said, yeah, I received support and didn't express in that forum a problem with it.
I did get confirmation that when we drop off and they stop everything and wait for us to come back.
Oh, okay. That's good.
It's such a bummer that this new beautiful building has Wi-Fi issues.
I know.
Seen it. He's on the list. Can you hear us now? Can you hear us?
Yeah, we
Can you
can't.
hear us?
Yes, I'm wondering though, could you actually take the slide down? Then we can see you all in the room.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
Stop sharing. Excellent. All right. Continue, Amy.
The last thing that I would say about the why are we doing this?
Well, I mean, what's the value that this adds? I understand the why. You could just point to there's a law, we have to do it. But I guess what's the value that this adds in your
I have something I can read from a real teacher.
Sure, let me start an abstract frame and then you read that. The abstract frame, I would say, is the intent of performance assessment is that candidates have an opportunity to demonstrate what they're learning and demonstrate it in a way that is authentic and valid and informative to their work. So that they can actually do the moves of teaching in the plan teach, assess, reflect, apply mode. The intent is so that they can learn. And back in the 1990s, we did the study of Senate Bill 1422 around all of the requirements for earning and concern, legislature and in the public's mind that the people coming out of teacher preparation didn't have any consistent preparation at all. That candidates from Cal State Freeway, really understood. I'm sorry, I'm not going to name any. Right? But UC Interstate. That Cal State Freeway had candidates who really had a good solid ground game most of the time, but from UC Freeway, they had a lot of theory, but not a lot of practice. And across the independent universities, those who were offering 100% online or doing whatever they were doing, the outcomes of teacher preparation were so varied that the legislature wrote this law and said to ensure that every single candidate who's prepared and credentialed to teach knows how to teach and has demonstrated that they can successfully do it. That was an answer to that problem. And so, but the legislature did this in a way that said the state will have a model and will make it available to every institution. But any other entity that has a better model can bring it forward for a review by the commission, including institutions like Cal State Fresno, or entities like the UC and Stanford group that put together the original pact that moved into TPA. So the law was flexible around how you do it, but absolutely certain that because this is a licensed profession, somebody should demonstrate that they can do this before they get their license. So here's a specific comment from a candidate that
Yeah, so just additional data, right? Because data is good. So the LPA is our most recent foray into talking directly to candidates.
Oh, it was great marks. I read that too. People seem to enjoy that one.
Yeah,
More so
probably.
than that.
All right, so here's what I was going to read. Right? So I find the LPA to be extremely challenging in applying the knowledge and skills gained from coursework to creating a meaningful literacy lesson that targeted multiple learning needs, assets, and strengths. So each student had opportunity to engage and make progress toward meeting learning objectives. Challenging. As challenging as it was equally rewarding in achieving successes and learning from reflection on the effectiveness of the instruction. This was a much more effective way for me to demonstrate my learning of and ability to teach literacy skills to students with diverse needs. Rather than experiencing test anxiety, which would have impacted my score in negative ways, the LPA gave me time to think, synthesize, utilize resources, and get to know real students' abilities and needs. This provided me with a very meaningful, enriching and learning experience in how to effectively teach literacy in an elementary class. So that's just one voice from one teacher candidate. So we see, as always, in a group, a wide distribution of experience. And you're seeing both sides of those experiences here. In this work, there was a strong preference to move away from an exam type experience around reading instruction to a performance assessment experience. So that may be something we can learn from, you know, that because teaching is doing it in a performative way and an assessment is perhaps more authentic than sitting by yourself in front of a computer screen doing a multiple choice open response item exam. We have this type of methodology. We have a law that says measure. If you ask me personally, I think the performance assessment process of multiple ways to demonstrate what you can do is more authentic and fair for anyone in a performance-oriented job. And that's just my 2 cents, and that's one. This feedback, by the way, is in the literature you received yesterday. I think it was 6A. And the full report is here. And on we go into our second year of development. We'll see what candidates continue to tell us. Thank you.
So I just want to review the list. I have Mandy, Tina, Talia, Vanessa, and give me your name, please. All right, Mandy.
I have 4 hopefully really quick questions. I want to piggyback on what Devin was talking about, which is really interesting because this was the first time I heard that too. That you could use the data that you gain in cycle 1 and use it for cycle 2. But I would assume that means that you're with the same group of students, right? That would imply that you're with. So if you don't pass cycle 1, so you would have to go back and redo it, possibly with a new group of students, depending on what timing, how the timing works out, right? And so I guess to me, that speaks to the duplicative part that we talked about earlier. So if you finish cycle 1 in that same year, then you can use the data for cycle 2. But if you don't do it within that year and you have a new group, then you have to kind of start over to collect that data, right? And so that would be that duplicative part.
Let me speak to that too. So there, I think is, so one of the things that happens is when a candidate submits, and it's a series of pieces of evidence that we're looking at, it could be that there's just one component that they didn't spend as much time or thought on, perhaps. And you can speak to this because we talked about it this morning. So maybe you really went all out on your planning. You did your video recording, you picked your clips, you provided your annotations about what you were doing and why you were doing it, and you kind of ran out of energy, or you aren't as reflective as maybe you need to be, and you don't really tell us how you apply it. And so when we give you that, the whole point of those analytic rubrics, TPE driven, was to give you specific feedback on, hey, it was your reflective piece that needs to be resubmitted. So you can resubmit with just one piece revised if necessary. Now, if you're off base, if the instruction you're providing to the students, you're telling us who your students are. And if you provide instruction that's not appropriate for those students, then you may have to start again. If you're not providing instruction that meets the needs of those students in front of you, or whatever the issue is, right? So it's a whole continuum again of things that come in the door and what has to happen, but you can resubmit part, you can resubmit the whole, you know, you can redo the whole thing. It's again, something that we really hope is done in consultation with your faculty.
Do you think though that the timing wise, in terms of you need to resubmit and the process of that resubmission and then providing feedback, is it even possible for that to happen within the course of an instructional year to be able to then move to cycle 2? Or are you going to kind of have to start over with a new group of students?
So that's a really great question. That is a program design question. And this is why we so encourage the first cycle, whichever one you want to do first, happens somewhere like November, December. So feedback gets to you, and then you can have time to redo if you need to. before you engage in cycle 2. Some people go ahead and engage in cycle 2 and then, so it's flexible in that manner.
Institutional.
It's an institutional program level decision and supports that should come from the program around kind of, in some ways, executive functioning skills of organization, right? Backwards mapping and planning, and let's all be clear. But we also really encourage that second instructional cycle to be done early enough in the second semester or third quarter, wherever program design you have, so that there's time to revise and resubmit if you have to before you complete your program. I have always been very worried about getting to the whole end of a teacher prep year, paying tuition, only to be told that I have failed my performance assessment. What am I supposed to do now?
You have to start over, right?
Well, this is again a program level decision. And yes, you would have to because you haven't passed. And so then programs have to decide, do I take them back? Do I make them pay tuition again? Do they have to sign up for a course? Do we have to re-enroll, which gets into another whole set of conversations about what does enrollment mean? And who has to pay for this is a big question always in our mind. Like, we would love programs to support their candidates all the way through coursework, all the way through clinical practice and passing a performance assessment. Then you're finished with their program, right? So because you paid for that. But anyway, this is your question. And so it's really a program design question.
Can I add one thing?
So
I know it's not a question, I was just.
My second question is related to the focus students. When we were talking about language earlier of being able to access a wide range of classroom settings, do you have any accommodations in place for a classroom setting that may not include an English language learner or a special needs student? Are there accommodations for that?
Yes, so in the specific language in the assessment guide, it allows for that. So if you have a district identified English learner, we encourage you to work with that child. If you have someone who has recently been confirmed or let out of that, but still has language needs, we encourage you there. If you have neither of those identified students, particularly as we work with our younger and younger students, we don't want to identify them too early, but we clearly have students that might need some language development support. Pick that child. So there is a child or student in every classroom that can meet those 3 types of students, we believe.
Do you see a discrepancy in pass rates for people who may not have the EL designation, for students who use an alternative?
Really question, but my gut is no.
Okay.
But we can look at that. That's an interesting question.
Amy, sorry.
My third question.
Can I add?
Oh, Heather.
Hi, Mandy, this is Heather. I wanted to add, there's a full list of all the focus student alternatives in the full document that we provided. We gave a pretty high level overview in the presentation, but the full delineation for all the credential areas is in the document. And then we did actually pull out and disaggregate the focus student selections for the literacy performance assessment. And it did not appear to have an impact on the pass rate in that pilot because we only had 5 out of our 219 candidates not pass the pilot. So you can see who the candidates selected. I don't think that was provided to you in the data that was provided in item 6A, but we did link it within the document for the Cal TPA presentation. So if you want to take a look at who candidates selected, you can take a look at that.
In the narrative, Heather?
Yep, in the narrative document. Yes.
Okay. And we do have to get you a new copy of the narrative because you got it. But yeah, in this item too, and you can see, so yes, it's a really interesting question who the focus students are, and we did track it in the LPA to see, because we were really curious about foundational reading needs and who would they identify? They often were children who were identified English language learners typically, but yeah, there's flexibility there. So no one should be in a classroom context setting where they would come back and say, I don't have that kind of student. But it's their choice.
And my third comment, I just wanted to piggyback on what Colin was saying earlier. The condition code information is new to us today. But in our resources before, we had the other data charts, and I had kind of already identified that there are very specific race or ethnicity groups that continuously perform below others. What I find somewhat alarming today is that I see the exact same trends in the non-scorable condition codes. And I continue to be a little concerned that we haven't taken that data and really drilled down to understand it. So I would argue, while maybe the components that the candidate receives have gone through a bias check, that this data and the outcomes has not thoroughly. And that might be an area for us to explore and understand better, because there is clearly bias happening over multiple different measures. And then my last one is just, I don't know if anyone else was alarmed, but the first chart where we have in 23-24, 1,698 not yet passed. I'm seeing the trend from 2018 go from 19 all the way up to almost 1,700 candidates. And so that just, it scares me that it keeps going up. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to why that's happening.
So that is, I was alarmed as you were when I saw that table and said, what, hello, Xavier, what is this? This is a very complicated answer to that question. So because data is constantly coming in and we're looking at it in an annual way. And Xavier, if you're with us, you can chime in here. That number, when we get this next year's data, will decrease significantly because we have this 12-month registration period. And as that data represents codes given, not individuals. And so it's just, in some ways, it's a very confusing table. I can't tell you exactly what it means. It means that there's 1,000+ people still in the system registered to take that cycle, but I don't know anymore. I don't know why they haven't taken it. I don't know when they're going to take it. I don't know if they're going to take it. They have 12 months to take it. Jump in.
I'm going to say it's partially a person like me's fault. I told all my candidates, June 30th, you're going to have to pay. So people that were coming into program, people that were at one point or another, register. You have 12 months to be able to complete that assessment. If you wait to July 1st, now you have to pay. So there's a, so there's a whole bunch of folks that registered in advance of their program. So they might not have received the instruction to complete the TPA, but they made sure that they could take advantage of that fee waiver. And so that's why we think it will go down significantly, because I mean, if you knew there's a sale, you take advantage of stuff on the day of the sale, right?
Yeah.
But the trend was going up even before that happened.
Yeah, so we need to go back.
I think that's a very important question and observation. And data is illuminating. I say that in this room. Every time I'm in this room, data illuminates and shows us where we need to go and look deeper. And we don't, all we have right now with this column, and I've heard this from the team several times, is speculating about what it might be, what people might be. This is something that I think a recommendation potentially coming from this group is to get to the bottom of what's happening with those who've never completed, figure out the ways in which we can know that at the state level, and how many condition codes are deployed. And we need to know a lot more about that population than our assessment designers and the data coming in have access to. But I know I'm committed to putting that on our agenda as something to work on. So if that's something we could bring a better answer to as we go, so we don't separate on that. We can separate truly as long as this group wants to.
And if I may, just to kind of just to follow on to Executive Director Sandy's comments. In this meeting, we have a series of work group meetings that are going to allow us to focus on different aspects of this issue area. We're going to look at embedding and accreditation next time. So perhaps kind of hold inquiry that is focused on embedding and accreditation, and when we have the folks that can answer the questions sitting at the table. And then we're going to talk about local scoring. We're going to talk about developing the kind of questions that would shed light on these things, surveys. But for this one, the charge is for us to get to recommendations about the tool, the specific tool. So if there are areas that you're spotting here where it's a question, that's going to live in a couple of places besides the same coin. But we're on the side of the coin that is the actual, rather than the context in which it's being implemented.
Thank you, Adam. All right, Tina, you're up.
Okay, thank you. So I had a question. I had several thoughts coming here. I wanted to just ask a question about our process today. So 5A and 6A, 5A being the program and assessment standards and 6A being the data that we were supposed to get to yesterday. Are we not going to have a discussion around those particular things? Are they going to be integrated into our discussion right now?
I would say yes, we would like them to be integrated into our conversation as we're speaking, because
okay,
we only
well,
here for a limited amount of time.
The charge last night, Tina, was that we use that data to inform today's questions.
Correct. And so I would like to argue for coming back to those two pieces in a more specific way, perhaps at the next meeting. And the reason being that I think one of the reasons we're all here is because of the data that has been coming in that people have read in a bunch of different places, and the importance for us to understand exactly what that data is. So, for instance, the surveys, there are a number of different surveys that have been conducted. There are those that have been given to credential candidates when they apply for their credential. There are those that have been given to candidates after they finish piloting TPAs. There are those that the CTA provided. And the data that we received in 6A is great, but I think one of the things that we really need to understand, I always want to understand when I look at surveys, is the sample. I would like us to have better information to understand what the sample is and who it is. I want to understand the response rate. I want to understand how the survey was administered. I want to understand who's missing. So, for instance, in the CTA survey, the survey of members with teaching credentials who completed the TPA. So that's the information that we have. What I don't know is what is the actual sample size? How many teachers in California have teaching credentials who have completed the TPA? In other words, what percentage of those completed this survey, for instance? And same with all of the others, so that we can get a better understanding of the significance of this data and how to think about it in the context of our conversations. The second thing I wanted to understand is with the program standards and the assessment standards, the program standards, one of our sticking points have always been what the responsibilities, not just the responsibilities of programs, but where does the TPA belong? Is it a program completer requirement? Is it a credential completer requirement? Is it both? Who's responsible? What are the responsibilities? And while these documents lay out some of the responsibilities, I'm always extremely concerned when I hear that a candidate can finish a program and the program says, you're done, adios, and they have not passed the TPA. And then the program has no way of contacting them and understanding where they are, or it would seem have any responsibility for them. And so I want to understand how that comes about, and that maybe comes into play with our program standards and assessment standards. And maybe it's even as far as statute and who's responsible. So I'm hoping we can have a conversation about that. The last thing I would love to see and understand a little bit more, and if we're getting back to our different assessment sponsors. So Amy, in one of the things that's really important about our TPAs and the formative aspects of our TPAs is that they're formative for programs as well as candidates, as we've talked about. And you mentioned in your response that all of the programs receive a results in a results analyzer. And I was wondering if we could get a demonstration of what that results analyzer looks like at some point. Yes. Okay, so those are my comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Tina. All right, moving on to Talia.
Hi, everyone. It's also more of a comment, but I'll leave it as a question at the end. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. So, one of the things that I kept coming back to was you look at 51, slide 51, where you look at A1, right? We see these condition codes, and then there's this comment about this might be due to the fee waiver, right? And then I heard that come up again with the slide on Marissa's comment on slide 45, right? With that alarming number of not yet passed. It might be, this high number because folks are signing up for the fee waiver. So I wanted to make the comment of like bringing this back to actual people who are being asked to pay $300 every single time they have to resubmit. And we had this conversation last time about how the system is set up where, and I heard it again, let's say that you miss this one point, you can just, resubmit everything else up until that point, and then that point is like a redo. But the reality is it's a whole redo because we're paying $300 all over again. And when we think about, is this valid for a credentialing candidate who is not working, who has just probably finished, field work that's unpaid labor. And then I heard the alarming number of 100,000 educators have gone through this already. And I was like, times 300, I'm like, how much money is that, right? That we're pumping into this. And so not necessarily you all, but maybe the commission, what's your stance on for us to reimagine? We can't abolish the TPA, it looks like. So for us to reimagine, what does this look like for addressing the teacher shortage in California? The expansion of assessments, now we're going to pre-K to 3. And that to me is alarming, right? As an educator who's like, more assessments, right? Like expansion of assessments. And then the reality of the fact that it is tied to $300. And that is a tangible thing for people, right? $300 is a big thing. Most Americans don't have $400 to cover an emergency. Yeah, we're asking new educators for over $300 multiple times sometimes to pass this assessment that seems to be super stressful. And I'm wondering how much of that stress is tied to this money, right? Like the funds that they might not have. So what's the position with credentialing on like expanding the fee waiver, advocating for the fee waiver, abolishing the cost to then make this an actual assessment that can be refocused and reimagined to a formative feedback observation and not this super stress financial burden that it seems to be.
I think that question is so on point. And I've got a commissioner in the room probably listening also over here. This question is really on point. And it goes to 3B in today's agenda, which is performance assessment improvement. And yes, I can tell you that I personally and professionally have advocated for a waiver performance assessment, something that is embedded in preparation and expectation of the state. I'm not ashamed to say it. Whoever's listening, come for me because I think it's the right thing to do. And on retakes as well, you're raising some very important points at this table about where should the burden lie for this. And my hope is that you collectively bring some recommendations to the commission that they can take up and implement on, as part of a 3-year work plan following the completion of this work that's designed to improve performance assessments with candidates in mind. Absolutely, with candidates and with programs, right? We need, if there are improvements that are needed, let's do it. But let's also look at this fiscal burden. So many of the comments talked about the costs that are associated with this. I think you have a right to say something about that, and I hope you do. And if we get to 3B today, cheers. And first one out of the chute on model description is certainly going to have probably this level and depth and time associated with it. And it's good. I don't want to stop any of your deliberation about this at all. But write down these, start just taking notes about things that you think are legitimate for consideration by the group for improvements in the future. And none of that is off the table for you at all.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah. Mission liaison is thumbs up in me over here. So.
All right, Vanessa.
Hi, I have 2 questions. First,
can you give us a kind of off of what Matt was saying earlier, what would be the benefit of an institution choosing to implement Cal TPA versus Ed TPA?
It's absolutely a decision of the program. We have had the opportunity to talk to you about our model, which is different than the Ed TPA. You haven't heard about the Ed TPA model. I can tell you that both assessments cost exactly the same. That was purposeful. We were not going to charge any differentiated kind of fee to force decision-making around that point. In addition, I think, it's important to understand that, well, let me just say it this way. We kept it at $300. It's been at $300 for almost 10 years. And we do not, so sometimes we have what we call a management fee that comes back to the commission to help continue the validity of an exam, for example. We do not add any management fee to this fee to candidates in the effort to keep the price as low as possible. In the last 2 years, we did have the fee waiver, which was extremely helpful, not only for performance assessment, but for exams. We've also moved to say that CBEST is now no longer required. You don't have to pay for that. Also, RICA will no longer be required because we now have the coming LPA, right? So we're pulling down the number of measures and expectations and things that have to be paid for. You don't have to take CPAT. You can have a transcript review. So the work, in general, across all the different agencies that oversee education in California, they're moving towards understanding this issue of what it costs to pay tuition and then also pay for all of these other measures, right? So that is starting to come down for candidates. But going back to this question about one, why over the other, we're not in a position to advocate for one over the other. Programs get to choose.
Or the value of what a person going through TPA would get is going through an NTPA.
I can only speak anecdotally. We don't have a survey out there. We haven't done that research, but in our model, we wanted it to be formative in the sense of formative in nature, as was discussed yesterday, by having a cycle that you could do and get feedback, get coaching, continue to work on your practice, and then come into the second cycle. So that's one clear difference in the two models. There are other things that are different, but I feel a little uncomfortable with this question, to tell you the truth. I don't feel comfortable answering it.
As TC help here. I think it's an important question, but there may be made this choice. Institutional representatives.
We're transitioning right now. We are absolutely transitioning from NTPA to Cal TPA.
We also have, and that's how I do this, Madam Chairs. We also have as our next presentation an update on the FAST, which is a third option. It's not just at TPA or Cal TPA. FAST is an example of an institution taking advantage of statutory allowance of their own. And so to broaden your question, if you're willing, why would an institution want to select Cal TPA, Ed TPA, or develop their own? And what are the costs and benefits of that? Maybe a real important question as you're considering what implementation strategies or what your opportunities for improvement might begin to look like. So
my second question, which is, does the Cal TPA recommended instructional minutes or anything for the institutions that dictate what types of support and like how to teach how to take the test? Is there anything, like some institutions have seminars where they take a full day of instruction to go over the test? Is there criteria that you communicate to the institution to say you can spend a lot of time with your supports or reviewing the test or things like that?
Can I answer that?
Sure. As a former program sponsor, no, I was able to make the decision based on my context. There are some contexts where they say, you know what works best for our candidates is to pull a seminar. We had one institution that took everything else out of the semester and focused on a seminar. We had another that fully embedded into their courses and worked along. One of the wonderful things about these things is the ability to do that. I'm from Merced. We are in a rural Central Valley. The candidates that we see, the spaces that we're in, You know, the fact that when I drive to the next town, there's a bunch of cows, you know, it's a very different context than where my husband grew up in Southern California. So we are able to make those decisions based on the context and where we are and what works best for us, and to swivel and change when we see something's not working so good, to be able to make those changes. But each of the model sponsors do provide support to their folks. And there's in some of your data, there's digging deeper sessions that Cal TPA does provide. There are seminars, there's a lot of trainings. That's how I met Amy, is going to trainings and asking lots of questions. And yeah, so, you know, and yeah, but those are all part of the things. And I was able to take that and say, okay, now I need to go back to 76 education specialists throughout Merced County working in rural schools where K-12 and there's 6 classrooms and they're multiple. How am I able to take this information and make it work here? And so that's one of the flexibility of program sponsors that they have in this space.
Vanessa. All right, we have 2 more folks. Tori, who will be followed by Kathy.
I wanted to ask about a couple slides to go over with the potential improvement slides, and I'm wondering if you can share anything about which from the TPA field test that might inform any sort of TPA design or improvement around those 4 areas, formative, nature, et cetera.
Yeah, so we learned a lot, and coming out of the first 8 years into that design work, with yet another group of educators, this time with a very unique task ahead of us, which was that we had to meet the expectations of 488 around foundational reading instruction, as well as the additional themes, and how are we going to explicitly look at that, which in the prior years there'd been lots and lots of choice and room for around how do you want to teach math in one cycle? How do you want to teach literacy in another? But now we're in a new world of the LPA. So we learned a lot, and Heather Kennedy is online with us, who's also been working alongside with me and the team to bring this forward. But some of the things that we have learned over time, right, again, are contextually dependent. We need to have as many flexible choices as possible for the candidates in the way that they demonstrate their knowledge, following good UDL principles. So more choices about, do you want to write your response? Do you want to video record or audio record your response? We tried to build that in, and we had some success there. We also closely looked at our rubrics, which were, you know, we always over design, and we tried to be as specific as possible with candidates about what we wanted. And in some ways it was a bit much. So in the LPA, we have looked carefully at level 4 and 5 and decreased the expectation to step up to those next 2 levels. And again, in the scoring, we saw a good return in seeing more candidates able to demonstrate that slightly higher level of performance. So I would say that was a good thing. The other thing is we moved away from saying, give us your video clip, and here we thought we were being efficient by saying, here are annotations that you can have this downloaded menu, choose it, tell us what you're doing and why you're doing it. But it also meant you only had so many characters to respond, so you couldn't give us a full description. So now in the LPA, we call it commentary instead of annotation, and you can write more in depth about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and that seemed to be very productive. Let's see, what else? We worked again on clarifying terminology. We are also looking at some very explicit changes in the actual architecture of the structure of the online platform. Because you go, you register, you download, then you build things, and you have to move them over and upload. There's a lot of steps there that it could be more efficient. And so we're looking at a web-based platform moving forward into the future to help with some of that, and also a way to take that whole thing and put it right into Canvas, if that's the LMS you're using, so that faculty can come right in and look at what you've done and leave comments and notes. I can share my work with Marissa. Marissa can share her work with me. We can look at it, you know. So we're thinking about that from a candidate user perspective. We've also come to understand over the years that while it is as nice as possible to build documents like this that have lots and lots of text, lots and lots of people don't want to read anymore. That's not how we learn anymore. If you think of anyone, I think of my 3 children. They want to learn something. They go to their phone and they Google it, and they watch somebody do something, and then they do it, whether it's a skateboard move, playing a song on a guitar, whatever. I think my son, our sons. So they don't, so anyway, that being said, we are now developing video clips so that if you don't want to read it, you can click on the video clip and you'll have a teacher or a teacher candidate telling you what they thought about what it means to work with an English language development student. So we're trying to really think about that aspect of the interactiveness of it and how do we engage in that environment and how do we bring information to candidates so they'll actually, really listen to it, look at it, and then maybe we can really cut down on those condition codes, right? Because I think we really have found, this is anecdotally, but if you're not reading the directions and you're not turning something in, you're going to get a condition code, right? And we really want to get those condition codes to 0. So those are some of the things. And Heather Kennedy, would you like to add anything else about what we have done already in the model to shift for this next generation that's going to come along in 25?
You covered quite a bit, but one other thing we did was really expand the choices around the video clips. And so they have an allocated number of minutes in total in the pilot. They had 20 minutes of video, but they could allocate it into the number of video clips that they felt best showcase their practice. So they had up to 4 video clips, but they could choose maybe one 10-minute one, one 5-minute one, another 5-minute one. They could give us one continuous 20-minute clip if they felt that really showcased all of the things that were being asked for in those rubrics. So they really appreciated that flexibility there in step 2 in teach and assess. And one of the other items that we really worked on was just giving them a lot of choices in general. Amy outlined a lot of those. And they had choice in the response modality, so they could provide us with the video of their feedback, of their commentary, which replaced the annotations, or they could write it. So going back to those UDL principles, and same with the feedback that they provided to students and the assessments that they designed for students in the LPA, so they could actually film for the student work product if it was something that was more of a performance or a process that the student was going through, rather than just, scanning and uploading a worksheet or something like that, where they could use an audio file. So lots of different choices there as well.
Thank you, Heather. So in the interest of time, we will take one more comment from Kathy and they will respond, and then we will conclude with this presentation and move on to Bass.
I just wanted to get back to Vanessa's question, since that's what my institution is in the process of doing right now. The short answer is that we felt it was better for our candidates, and it was a much better the Cal TPA was a much better alignment with how our program is structured. So that's like the short answer, but some of the details is like when the faculty kind of got together to look at, the literacy standards and some of the other things that were going on in the new TPA, we felt that there was, we had candidates who had taken the Ed TPA and had struggled, and the kind of all or nothing thing at the end we felt was not good. And so we really wanted something where they take one cycle in the first semester, their student teaching, and then they can do the other cycle in the second one, so that it's not a total all or nothing, and that they can get some feedback and some more instruction and, process in that. We are hoping that that's going to be much better for them. But that's, in a short, that's what we felt was much more, we felt it was just better and more aligned with our program in general in terms of, how we teach. And, again, we really felt strongly about them having the options, because some candidates really did say that the writing was a hard lift for them, the annotations. And so that option to respond with a video was really a good thing for them. So
I hear you saying the CalAPA is more reflective and more appropriate for candidates to make errors and learn from them.
Yes.
TPA.
Yes, TPA. And TPA is, at least that was our experience. But I mean, the Ed TPA is redesigning themselves too. So we'll see what.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah.
We really
Wish we had 3 days.
Happy birthday again.
Yeah.
So we're gonna take a 5-minute recess just to be able to set up the Zoom and all of the links.
Morning, Susan.
Good morning. How are you all doing? I'm sorry I can't be there.
be sharing your own screen?
I can share my own screen if that works best.
Wonderful, thank you.
Mhm. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I am here to talk about the FAST, the Fresno Assessment of Student Teachers. My name is Suzanne Brandel, and I am the coordinator of the FAST assessment currently. A quick background to the FAST. This assessment was developed in-house at Fresno State with funding from a Title II grant. It was originally reviewed and approved in 2007. And it was updated in 2018 to align with the design standards and with the updated TPEs. A couple years ago, we did develop an ed specialist version, and it has been designed and approved by the commission as well in 2022. Our FAST is integrated into the teacher education program. Our courses align their assignments. Kind of a gradual release with our students so they can build the skills, build their ability to design lessons, to build support such as UDL, CSP, things like that, and to understand how to use assessment of students' learning to then guide instruction. We have rubrics that were developed to assess the different sections of our FAST projects. And those rubrics are used by the coaches in our students' evaluation of their teaching and their observation, and also to help guide their reflection at the end of each of their observation. Our faculty at Fresno State that teach in the credentialing program are involved in the assessment. They help score the assessment, and they also understand the assessment so they can provide specific feedback to the students in their the first half of the semester to really support their understanding of each of the steps. The projects are implemented within our candidates' clinical practice setting. So it's very relevant to who they're working with, who they're teaching at the moment. The projects are funded by the Fresno State Kremen School of Education and Human Development, so there are no extenuating costs to our students. It's completely embedded within our teaching program and within the and the scoring is all provided by the school as well. We have two different projects. The first project is the site visitation project. This is completed in their phase 1 of clinical practice. Our students in the multiple subject and single subject have two different phases of their clinical practice, their student teaching. So their first project is completed in that first initial student teaching, and then the second project, the teaching sample project, is completed in their second phase or their final student teaching. Site visitation project assesses our candidates' ability to plan, teach, and evaluate a lesson that's aligned with the TPEs and the California State standards. It is a single lesson, 20 to 45 minutes. This lesson can be taught either whole class or small group. The lesson they create is focused in content area. Right now it's mathematics, and they've added language development embedded within that with that math lesson. There are 3 sections: planning, implementation, and reflection. And each of those are scored on a 4-point rubric. And each of those 3 sections is divided, the rubric is divided into 3 smaller distinct areas. One being their ability to implement subject-specific pedagogies. One being the ability to connect what they're teaching to the knowledge that they have of their students. I'm sorry, I just heard voices. Was there a question or do I keep going?
We'll continue.
Okay, sorry. And then the third piece is their ability to implement engagement techniques that support equitable participation throughout either the whole class or the group of students that they're working with. The second project, the teaching sample project, is a much more complex project. This assesses our candidates' ability to plan an integrated unit of study. It has to have at least 5 lessons, and its focus is in a content area, and they have to embed literacy instruction. There are 7 sections to this project, and each of them are also scored with a 4-point rubric. Our teaching sample project has an area where they gather contextual information about their students. They have to develop their own learning outcomes for this unit of study. They have to pre-assess their students to figure out where they are in terms of those learning outcomes, develop their unit of study based on the results of those pre-assessment, that pre-assessment data, and then have a summative assessment that they can then analyze to determine student learning and growth. And then they have to reflect on that whole process and think about, based on that whole process of developing and designing this unit, what areas they see that they would like to then grow professionally once they leave the program. Currently, we have 3 models that are approved for implementation. We have our FAST 2.0, which are multiple subject and single subject candidates complete. And then we also have a FAST version for our ed specialists. And we have a separate manual for both our students that are in a mild to moderate support needs classroom, and then a manual that's specific to our students who are in extensive support needs classroom. Currently, right now, we are piloting FAST 3.0 for our multiple subject candidates who are in specific residencies. That includes the literacy performance assessment within our SVP. And we are also currently developing a FAST 3.0 to integrate the literacy performance assessment for our ed specialists, both mild to moderate and extensive support needs. So those are up and coming. For the FAST, we do have a pretty intensive scoring process. All of our assessors are trained and calibrated to be able to score the projects. Both faculty and our university coaches do score our projects. We have an orientation for all coaches every semester, and then our new coaches each year go through a pretty intensive trainings session and then calibrate on our existing rubrics. And then every single year, our seasoned veterans that score and coach and teach in our program calibrate every single year, and they must be within 1 score point to continue their calibration status. Every single semester, we double score 15% of the projects. So 15% of our single subject, and we delineate that by 15% of our ag, 15% of our English, 15% of our math, and all of the different subject areas. We also do 15% of our multiple subject, 15% of each of our of mild mod and ESN programs. And then every 2 years, we do a psychometric analysis. 100% has been within 1 score point, and almost 95% agree that a project would pass or fail based on that scoring. Our candidates do have to receive a 2 or higher in that rubric in order to pass their FAST component. Okay, so that's a little background, a little information about our projects. And now we'll kind of talk more about parts that you guys have requested. So in terms of being formative in nature, embedded in preparation, and valid and authentic. Both of our projects, our TSP and our SVP, are based in our candidates' clinical practice, and they're conducted during the final weeks of the semester. One, ensuring that the projects are relevant to who they're working with and to the candidate or to the children that they've been learning about and assessing throughout the semester. It also allows for our candidates to have multiple opportunities of feedback from observations in those classrooms before they actually implement either their SVP or their TSP. Our candidates cannot pass their clinical practice if they do not pass the SVP or the TSP. So they don't just move on from our program if they have not passed that TPA. Our faculty is very familiar with the FAST projects. So through their coursework, they support candidates in understanding all of the components of our FAST projects. So they make sure that they understand and know current subject-specific pedagogies. Right now, our math methods instructors support our candidates while they're doing their SVP because it is a math lesson with integrated literacy. Our revision, where our candidates will be taking the SVP with the literacy performance assessment, will then swap and start taking that literacy foundation class during the same semester so that they're getting instruction in that subject area while they're conducting these assessments. They also take classes that support them throughout both projects. Our culturally and linguistically sustaining pedagogies class really supports the students in how to meet our students' learning needs. We have developmentally appropriate practice class that supports them in giving those scaffolds to children and meeting them where they are. And all of these are supported by our coaches who get updates from the faculty to see what they're teaching in the class so they know what to look for in those observations. In terms of being formative in nature, both the SVP and the TSP are scored by our faculty and our university coaches. All of our faculty and our coaches understand the requirements of the projects, and they provide feedback from the beginning of the semester until they submit these projects, and they are aligned with the FAST expectations. Our coaches observe our candidates in their placement and provide formative feedback throughout the semester until they conduct this project. They give them feedback on their lesson planning. They give them feedback with TPE specific feedback prior to them performing these projects. They don't give them specific feedback on the project, but they can give them very specific feedback on the lessons that they do prior to that implementation. Our coaches and our faculty score these projects within a week or two, and they provide candidate with immediate feedback that they can implement directly into their teaching when they are back in the classroom. Our candidates in their initial student teaching get their results from their initial project, the SVP, before they start their second semester. So they know which areas they need to really focus on. They know which areas maybe they struggled with. Our coaches also know their scores from the first semester and can very directly target their feedback to support candidates in those areas that they may have struggled and need additional support. Throughout the year, we have multiple different times that we look at FAST data to make sure that our program is supporting our students in the way that we need to, and also to inform our own improvement for our practices. In the spring, we hold a teacher education summit, and at this summit, we have faculty, we have coaches. We also invite our mentor teachers who are in the classroom with their candidates and our district and site partners so that they can also help analyze FAST data and what areas maybe we could look at for growth and improvement. Before the year starts, we have a teacher education retreat that our faculty and coaches attend. This is where we analyze all of our data for specific areas of program improvement, and we make goals for that year. Each year, we also have to put together a report for AQEP, the Association for Advancing Quality in Educator Preparation. And our program faculty have to analyze scores in different areas to demonstrate how our programs are meeting the standards for our candidates' performance in the classroom. How our project is valid and authentic to the work of teaching. Like I've said, our FAST projects are completed within our candidates' clinical practice setting. They have to learn and know about every one of their students, and they have to develop lessons and units to meet the needs of that specific context. It needs to be authentic to their children's needs. They have to meet their children where they are. They also have to think about how to connect what they're doing to their children's lives outside of the classroom. And we ask them specific questions in the reflection of how they met their students' needs and what maybe they could do differently moving forward. Both the TSP and the new version of the SVP 3.0, are using current assessment data to inform instruction. So both the TSP and the SVP require our students to pre-assess their students in the area that they will be teaching to then inform their instruction. Both projects embed at least 2 disciplines that demonstrate that interconnectedness of teaching the disciplines in our classrooms. And the candidates have to reflect on their ability to provide instruction to meet the needs of their students. Let's see. How is it reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom settings? We have students in every setting possible. We have students in multiple subject. We have students in DLI, the dual language immersion. We have students that are getting their multiple subject credential, but teaching in a 7th or 8th grade classroom. We also have our high school students that are in all sorts of different subject areas. Both our SVP and our TSP require candidates to compile contextual information, understand the backgrounds of their students, including their interests, their learning profiles, what type of learners they are. And our candidates have to use that information to then develop the lessons or the unit that fit in their specific context. We have students that are in very remote areas. We have students in single grade classroom, multi-grade classrooms. And then, like I said, we also have students that are placed in DLI classrooms. And our candidates have the flexibility to teach in the language that makes the most sense for their context. If they're in a classroom that speaks 90% one language and 10% the other, they don't have to teach the whole unit during one or the other. They can actually mix and match whatever makes the most sense for their specific classroom. Our multiple subject and our ed specialists teach our SVP with math with embedded ELA and ELD, and our single subject teach their specific content area with embedded ELA or ELD. How is it appropriate for our beginning teachers? Our SVP and TSP are very scaffolded. It's there's a very step-by-step approach to guide our candidates through the steps, which are also they imitate what's required of a beginning teacher. We provide seminars that support our candidates in understanding all of the different steps to the different components to each project. We allow our students to collaborate with one another, talk to one another, bounce ideas off one another, and then they are tasked with going and then creating their own lesson or their own projects based on the knowledge of their students and making it specific to their students. We support our students in becoming reflective practitioners. We have very detailed questions about their overall effectiveness, also about how they specifically met the needs of their students. And they also have to make plans for professional growth and think about how they might find the resources they need once they leave our program. Our projects also develop in complexity and depth of knowledge. So the SVP in their initial clinical practice is a smaller scope. It's less complex in terms of the expectations. The lesson can be taught whole class, partial class, or small group. And it really focuses on, can this candidates include subject-specific pedagogy? How do they apply the knowledge of their students into developing a lesson? And then what types of engagement techniques are appropriate for that lesson and for that group of students? The TSP is definitely more complex and includes the more complex aspects of teaching. It's still scaffolded. It's very guided in terms of, gather contextual data, determine your learning outcomes, plan for a pre-assessment, analyze your pre-assessment, and use that assessment to then develop your unit of study. Provide a summative assessment, analyze for growth in your students. They do have to develop each of these aspects, but it's very scaffolded, and the seminars we provide for that are scattered throughout the semester. So they're getting information in little bits, and it's not all poured onto them all at once. Eliminating bias. We have multiple checkpoints embedded in our process to indicate possible sources of bias and to also eliminate any bias that's discovered. We do bias prevention trainings during our FAST trainings with all the coaches and all the faculty. We also review that bias during all of our calibration cycles. Our faculty and coaches have anti-bias training, which includes the implicit biases. And our final projects are scored by faculty and coaches who are not assigned to the students to eliminate any bias from previous experience or personal knowledge of the candidate. So they are given a completely anonymous scorer. And then 15% of all of our projects are double scored to ensure alignment across the board. So some of the data over the last few years, you can see in this chart the number of attempted in terms of all FAST. So in 2019 and 2020, 773 students. That's across all programs attempted. 94% passed their first attempt, and then an additional 25 students passed their second attempt, and 99.7% passed in those first or second attempts. So you can see across the board, they're very similar in terms of numbers of passing the first time and numbers of passing the second time. And overall, we do also, if our candidates do not pass their first attempt, they have a very intensive seminar with our FAST coordinator. And the FAST coordinator will go over through the entire project again, not pointing out specific areas that the candidate missed, but going through the rubric and pointing out areas that the candidate might not have been very detailed or descriptive, so that they can then go back and revise their project. After the second attempt, if they do not pass the second attempt, our candidates can appeal for a third attempt. And at that point, they have to describe why they believe that they should earn a third attempt to submit. And after that third submission, if they still do not pass, they have to redo their clinical practice. And what that tells us is they just weren't quite prepared to be in a classroom by themselves. So they do have an extra semester to have a coach come and observe them 6 times, give them feedback, and they redo a project in order to demonstrate that they're ready to be in their own classroom. Let's see. So 2 years ago, in 22-23, we ultimately had 8 students that did not pass, and 7 of them chose to come back and do an extra term of clinical practice and ended up passing that next time around. And then in 23-24, we had 5 students and 4 chose to come back. They can choose to decide that they just don't think this is the right profession for them. And they also have the opportunity to wait a year and then come back. And so sometimes they need that year to sub or do some other types of learning before they choose to finish up their credential. Delineated by ethnicity, across the top, you can see the years, the number that were submitted, and the numbers that were passed. This slide specifically is for our first project for the SVP. So you can see the number of SVP that were passed in this last year, 23-24, 96.9%. And when you look down, you can see the 2 areas that struggled the most were our Southeast Asian and our white population. And that's all just being submitted for the very first time. This isn't taking into consideration the number of students that went back and passed the second time. And then for our TSP, this is the number that passed on the first submission. So you can see 88.4% passed with their first submission last year. And you can look down and see we have between 80 and 90% in terms of our Hispanic, our students that choose not to identify as a certain ethnicity, our Southeast Asian and our white population are all between about 80 and 90% passing the first time around. And we don't really code for non-scorable because our non-scorable projects are typically projects that students did not complete. They may have taught the unit, but then they didn't finish completing all of the questions or write up their analysis, or the reflection was empty, things like that. So our non-scorable projects are returned to me, the FAST coordinator, and I meet with them just like I do our other students that don't pass. And we talk about what aspects of the rubric maybe they didn't attend to, and then they get to resubmit for a second time. It's a performance-based assessment. So they, put this project into place into their classroom, and then they have to put together a pretty lengthy write-up about why they made the choices they did, why they assessed the students in the way they did, why they designed the lessons that they did, and things like that. Let's see. I think that is all for the presentation. What kind of questions does anybody have for me?
Adam, is it correct that we were going to break right now before the questions, or would you like us to resume?
It's up to you. That is I can explain maybe a couple of the costs and benefits. So what you could do right now is if we break for lunch, then you can run over to the cafeteria, the cafe, grab some food, let this presentation percolate, and then we'll come back. The length of the lunch, I'm going to leave up to the co-chairs. And then we can move on with the question and answer. Alternatively, we could power through, and then we could break for lunch after the question and answer. And I'll leave it to the co-chairs to decide.
Another cost is if we don't get out the door by noon, lines are going to be
over there at 12:30. The first rush
will be done. We're through, or right now?
Howard.
All right, we will power through.
Yeah. Mine's closed anyway.
Can we switch the screen so that we can see Suzanne
Yes.
instead of the PowerPoint?
And so now we will open it up to questions and answers. You guys are.
Okay, I have a question. You. I just want to know if you have data post students passing, how many of them stay in the teaching profession successfully? And also, if you have a survey of how much they felt like the FAST process was a value to their teaching, successful teachers.
So I believe Juliet shared the survey that was sent out over the last couple of years. And while it wasn't great in terms of the amount of feedback we received, like the number of students that completed it, the overwhelming responses were positive towards the FAST. They did explain that it was tedious, it was lengthy, which we do explain that it's a very complex project. But we also really want our students to come away from us knowing how to take their context, assess them, know where they are, and teach directly and targeting the students and their needs. So it isn't an easy project by any means, but the students that did respond, overwhelming. There are some that just say it wasn't worth it, but there was an overwhelming positive response in terms of how it did prepare them for what they had to do in their own classroom moving forward. I am not 100% sure if we have data, the number of students that have continued in the profession and after 5 years. Juliet might be able to
not have that data.
Do not have that data. Elise says we don't.
Okay.
Tina.
A quick question just regarding some of the materials that you did submit. I can't access several of those links, and all of the links that go to like the student reflections or the rubrics. Can others access them? It's telling me the access is denied in Google Docs. But is it just me?
You don't have hard copies in.
It's referring to the. In which case, Tina, I believe that's just Ask is going to take a look at the sharing settings in Google. Give us a signal when it's time.
That would be great because I was really impressed with so many things, and I wanted to see some of the exact documents that you're talking about. Then I'll just switch. So one of the documents I could access was, and that also piqued my interest, was the gathering that you have with your faculty and your district partners when you're looking at the data. And I would encourage the rest of our work group members, if you haven't seen it, to click on that link, which is a PowerPoint of their day and how they organize that retreat, because it really looks great. But I have two questions around that. How many of your mentor teachers and district partners do you get to attend that spring retreat? And how is it that they come? Like, why do they come?
That's something I can speak to, if that's okay, because
Yeah,
Susie is
sure.
more just, but I'm the one who coordinates that event. So we don't have a huge number. I think our numbers in recent years have been around 75 people total. We've done it for 2 years now. We're hoping that it will continue to gain momentum. We have more district partners than mentor teachers, though we do always get some. Yeah, I can give you more specifics. But I will say, as a follow-up to that, and also partly to try and educate mentor teachers more about FAST, We are holding a mentor teacher conference, November 2nd, where there will be sessions just about this fast. What are the expectations of candidates? How can you support your candidates? In terms of though, trying to incentivize, get people there, it's, we don't really. That's the opportunity to help us think critically about the program.
Okay, and then a related question to your district partners, what kind of information do you have from them about how they interpret the FAST and whether it works for students, it's helpful, it's a burden, all of the kinds of things that we're discussing here?
That hasn't been something that we've collected from them specifically. What happens at the Teacher Ed Summit is they're put into groups based on their role, and they're just given a bunch of data and asked, like the FAST results, enrollment data, scores on clinical practice evaluations, and asked to look across that data and look for areas of strength and areas for growth. So it's not specifically focused on FAST, but the FAST data are some of the data that they're provided. That makes sense.
Okay. And then last, also related to that, I mean, one of the reasons we're here is we are hearing about faculty and candidates feeling overburdened by the TPA. How do your district partners feel, if even anecdotal evidence that you get from them about it?
Susie, I don't know if you've heard, I have not heard comments from them about them feeling overburdened by FAST, but
and I can just say from my role as a coach, because I'm not only the coordinator, I do coach 12 of the, I mean, we have hundreds of students, but I do coach 10 to 12 of them each semester. And our mentors are very positive about it. They see the benefit, they understand the steps that the students are going through. Sometimes it does not cause friction, but like if our students choose a subject area like social science or science, and their teachers are like, but we don't even hardly teach that. We have to advocate for our students to then say, it's a science unit, we're embedding literacy instruction. And then the mentors are usually like, okay, I get it, and they see the process in which they go through. But overall, the mentors and the principals that I've met with do not have any concerns by the projects that they're implementing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Vanessa, who will be followed by Kathleen.
My question is, well, I really appreciate the amount of time spent or attempting to spend to train the mentors and the institutions. Is there anything like that for credentialed candidates prior to taking the test or?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. So the FAST coordinator for the initial student teachers, when they do the SVP, they have two different options to go for the SVP seminar where they learn about all of the different components. We go very in depth into the rubric just so that they know how they'll be assessed on the lesson that they're teaching. And then for our TSP, which is a little bit more extensive, those seminars are split into 3 different components. So we meet with them once and really dive into students of context and how to develop learning outcomes. And then midway through the semester, we really talk about how to assess, what does a pre-assessment look like, and how do we use that information to then design our unit. And then about 2/3 of the way through the semester, we go over analysis and reflection of their own processes of teaching this unit. So we do spread that out so that they're not overwhelmed at the beginning of the semester and hear about this big, massive project that they have to do. We kind of guide them through it step by step.
Are there fees attached for the students?
No, there is no fees, and there's no fees associated when they resubmit if they don't pass, and there's no fees if they have to resubmit a third time. The only additional cost is if they have to come back for another semester of student teaching. They do have to enroll as a student teacher and enroll in that clinical practice. But we also have candidates who get hired after their final student teaching and haven't passed the TPA. So they haven't earned their full credential, but they get hired as an intern. And then they can do that project as an intern in their new placement. So there's different options for them as they move forward in terms of completing this. But even our interns have a coach assigned and have 6 full observations and get TSP and SVP support throughout. So it's very reflective and formative in terms of allowing them. Some students just need that extra semester to practice their teaching before they're ready for that preliminary credential.
Last question is, I'm trying to imagine it's a semester program at Fresno, but some of the other institutions are at quarters. And so I'm trying to imagine how this might translate. But also who pays for the orientation and the seminars and the retreats and that funding?
It's all funded by the Kremen School of Education. And like I have what would be, we consider 6 WTUs. And I provide all of those seminars for the students and the coaches and the faculty. It's kind of like if you were a coordinator of a program and you had some WTUs bought out by the program in order to fund all of those things.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, Kathleen.
All right, just a clarifying question. I'm learning so much today. So the CSTP, they have a corporate partner, Pearson. And I was wondering, just as a clarifying question, do you also work with any corporate partners? And if not, how do you manage to do everything in-house in terms of like the data management? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is it you?
Yeah.
It's you, isn't it?
It's me. It's me, but I also, we have a wonderful, like part of our statistician faculty support me in analyzing data sometimes or organizing the data when I'm not quite adept with some of those processes. They do help. But yeah, it's me and also the like Juliet, who's the teacher education coordinator. She also kind of supports me in that role. But yes, we analyze all of our data. We house all of our data. We provide all of the, we do everything in-house.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Suzanne. This is Patricia. I'm a Fresno Stater, so I graduated back in the day, 2005. My question goes to the district support. What kind of district support? And I know like you guys have your seminars, but I guess what I'm looking for is time. What is the expectation from the school districts on the time they're going to give teachers to complete this assessment, to go through the process, to take these days away from the classroom or from their students?
Yeah, absolutely. So there really is no time away from their students or their clinical practice. So the SVP is a singular math lesson, and we ask our students to discuss with their mentor an appropriate standard. So some of our students, if they're going to do a small group, will talk to their mentor and say, what area of math do students typically struggle with and need that circle back, need that review? Can I teach a really targeted review in that area to a group of students that is struggling? Or they look ahead and say, I'm going to be teaching this, a math lesson in November. What concepts are coming up in November? And so it really goes in flow. And then they try to have everything prepared by the end of, let's say, October, so that when that timing comes up that that lesson would need to be taught, it can be taught within those 3 weeks of November before they go on break. In terms of the unit of study, we have them develop a unit of study, and it's 5 lessons. Each of those lessons is 20 to 40 minutes long. It's in a content area with literacy instruction embedded into it. That would be the only component that sometimes our mentors are like, wow, we have to take 5 days of these lessons. But our students are really great at embedding good literacy instruction so that the mentors are allowing them to use time during, let's say, ELA time, but it's a science lesson with embedded ELD or ELA or social studies. Some of them choose to do a math unit with embedded literacy instruction, and so it fits right in time with their math schedule. And again, we ask them to please look ahead, look at the month of November, look at what concepts you'll be covering in terms of literacy. So what kind of concepts are coming up in literacy? Is it author's point? Is it, character development? How can we use those things that you want to cover in our social studies unit so that it really goes in line with what our mentors are already implementing in their classroom. So there really hasn't been a big instructional interference, I would say, with our candidates.
I'm sorry, I have 2 more questions. So hearing you talk, I just 2 more questions. Are the mentors that help coach these teachers, are they paid by the university? Do they get compensation in some way?
In our residency, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I would say in our residency program, they have some benefits. But in our typical, like in our standard cohorts, they do not.
And I get the other bigger question is I've noticed in some of the data, they have data for teachers who are in internships and then teachers who are just pre-service getting their stuff. So do you guys have the differentiated data as well? And it looks really good. Everyone's passing, but I was just curious if there's a difference between teachers who are internships and teachers who are not.
I will definitely say, I don't know. The data is not in there right now, but I will tell you that our teachers who are interns have a harder time passing the first time because they are really overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to do as the teacher of record. And it's not that they don't have the ability to do what we're asking them most of the time. Most of the time, it's the time that they need to put into it. I also will say that our interns also are very successful in a resubmission because it's just a matter of understanding the time. A lot of them wait till the last minute because they have other things that they're working on. They're interns, so they're just barely keeping their head above water. So when they submit that first time, it isn't always necessarily their best, the best reflection of what they can do. But once they receive their scores and they realize that this is a necessary component for them to continue, they really put the time and effort into it. And a lot of them are very successful in that resubmission. But like, again, that resubmission doesn't cost them anything. It's just the time they need to put towards it.
Additional questions?
Yes. I'm not sure if I got cut off, but I don't hear an additional question.
Yes, Suzanne, I was just giving some wait time.
Oh, okay.
Hearing none, so much for joining us.